Before we drift away, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more calming sleep stories. Sweet dreams await. The forest stretched endlessly on both sides of the winding road, each tree leaning in like a silent witness. Rain tapped against the windshield in steady rhythms, blurring the world beyond the glass. In the dim glow of the headlights, the outlines of the lodge appeared at last, an old, sprawling building of dark wood and stone, half hidden in mist. The traveler cut the engine. For a moment, only the rain and the whisper of wind through the treetops remained. The forest smelled of wet earth and pine, rich and heavy in the damp night air. A single lantern flickered on the porch. Its weak flame swayed as though it too feared the storm. The traveler pulled their coat tight, stepped out into the downpour and trudged toward the door. Inside, the lodge breathed with the weight of old years. Wooden beams groaned as though settling from a long sleep. Somewhere deeper in the building, a faint crackling of fire hinted at warmth. Yet the warmth did not reach the air by the door. Instead, it was cold, unnaturally cold. The traveler hesitated. Then, with a slow exhale, they set their bag down on the floorboards. Behind them, the storm thickened. The rain hammered the roof. The forest seemed to close in. And though the lodge was meant to be a refuge, it felt instead like a place where the night itself had gathered to wait. The fire in the main hall burned low, its orange glow dancing across the walls like restless shadows. The traveler placed their bag near a worn leather chair, listening to the crackle of the wood as if it were a voice speaking in a language just beyond recognition. The sound of the rain was constant, drumming against the roof, trickling down the stone chimney, weaving itself into the silence of the lodge. The room smelled of damp timber and smoke, a scent both comforting and unnerving. The lodge was large, built long before modern hands touched it, with thick beams that reached high overhead and windows that framed the forest outside. But the glass was so fogged with condensation that only the blur of rain and shifting tree lines could be seen. The traveler rubbed their arms for warmth, glancing at the old photographs on the walls. Families once stood smiling in front of this same hearth, though the faces were faded, their eyes dull and almost scratched away by time. A great hunting party in another picture posed with antlers and rifles, their expressions too stiff, too forced, as though they were trying to hide something. The traveler found no welcome in those stares. They turned toward the sound of dripping water and spotted a line of moisture crawling down the wall, spreading across the floorboards. The rain was working its way inside, and with every drop, the wood seemed to sigh. The chair by the fire beckoned, and at last the traveler lowered themselves into it, leaning back against the cracked leather. The fire's heat brushed across their face, a fragile shield against the chill that pressed in from every corner of the lodge. For a few minutes there was peace. But peace in such places never lasts long. The fire popped sharply, a piece of wood splitting in two. The traveler jumped, staring into the flames. For just a breath they thought they saw movement there, something more than sparks and smoke. A shape leaning forward, watching. The traveler blinked and it was gone, replaced by the ordinary glow of ember and ash. The storm outside grew heavier. The rain now fell in sheets, rattling the windows with sudden gusts of wind. The sound of the forest was almost lost beneath it, though every so often a groan of the trees or a sharp crack of a branch reminded the traveler that the woods never truly slept. They leaned forward, pulling their coat tighter around their shoulders, and let their eyes close. Sleep would not come easily, not with the unease that coiled in their stomach, but the body demands rest. Somewhere deep in the hallways, a door creaked. The traveler's eyes snapped open. The sound was not near. It was far off, deeper in the lodge, in a corridor where the firelight did not reach. It could have been the wind pushing at old wood, or perhaps the lodge itself shifting under the weight of rain. But when the traveler rose and looked down the hallway, they saw something. A figure. It was standing still, framed by the dark. Not moving. Not swaying. Simply there, a silhouette against the faint gleam of a window at the end of the corridor. The traveler froze, their breath caught in their chest. The fire hissed behind them, but the hallway remained cold and unmoving. Then, as if it had never been there at all, the figure melted away. A trick of the eyes. A shadow. A dream brought on by fatigue. And yet, the traveler could not bring themselves to sit again. They turned back toward the hearth, poking at the embers with an iron rod to bring the flames higher. The fire resisted, weak and stubborn, as though something in the air did not want it to burn brighter. The traveler whispered to themselves. A habit, perhaps. A comfort. Their own voice was steady, but it sounded smaller than they expected, swallowed quickly by the vastness of the lodge. At last, exhaustion pulled them back into the chair. They leaned their head against the worn armrest, eyelids heavy, hearts still beating too fast from what they thought they had seen. The storm outside raged. The fire whispered. And in the rhythm of rain and wood and flame, the traveler drifted slowly, unwillingly, into the fragile edges of sleep. But in the forest, just beyond the walls of the lodge, something moved. Not the trees, not the storm. Something else. Something waiting. The traveler stirred in the chair, caught between shallow sleep and waking. The fire had burned low, reduced to faint embers that pulsed weakly, casting the hall in dusky shadows. The storm outside had not softened. If anything, it seemed worse, its voice louder, more insistent. Rain lashed the windows, and the wind clawed at the wooden beams as though it were trying to pry its way inside. For a moment they forgot where they were. Their mind floated in that fog between dreams and reality, unsure if the warmth they felt came from the hearth or some imagined place far away. Their ears filled with the sound of rain, but then they noticed something else, something hidden within it. A voice. At first it was faint, drowned in the storm. A whisper woven into the rhythm of water striking glass. But as they sat up, blinking into the dimness of the lodge, the sound grew clearer. It was not words at first. Not exactly. More like the suggestion of words. The lilt of speech without meaning. A tone carried on the storm, flowing through the cracks of the windows, through the dripping walls, through the forest beyond. The traveler's skin prickled. They turned toward the glass nearest to them, the one to the left of the fire. Beyond the misted pane, there was only darkness, the forest lost in rain. Yet as they leaned closer, as they listened harder, the voice sharpened. Now it sounded like words. It was calling. Not in anger, not in joy, but in a low and steady murmur, like a parent soothing a child in the dead of night. The voice spoke with patience, with certainty. It knew the traveler was listening. Their heart thumped painfully in their chest. They pressed their hand against the glass, as if some part of them believed they could push the sound away. The cold shocked their skin, jolting them back from the haze of sleep. And suddenly the whisper stopped. Only the storm remained. The traveler exhaled, shaking their head, forcing a weak laugh that never fully formed. It was the storm, they told themselves. The rain had 1,000 ways of twisting sound. Everyone knew that. The lodge was old, the forest alive. Echoes were bound to form. Yet as they pulled away from the glass, something stirred at the edge of their sight. There, beyond the window. Not a shadow. Not a branch. A face. It hovered just outside, pale and blurred by the rain, eyes wide and unblinking. Its mouth was slightly open, as though mid-sentence. And before the traveler could even gasp, the face slid out of sight, swallowed by the dark. The traveler stumbled back from the window, heart racing, the chair scraping loudly against the floorboards. The sound echoed through the hall, bouncing off the wood, disturbing the silence. For a long moment, nothing happened. The traveler stood frozen, staring at the window, waiting for the pale face to return. But the rain fell harder, thick streams running down the glass, obscuring everything beyond it. The forest had vanished again into shadow. They turned slowly toward the hallway, that long corridor where they had seen the figure before. The door at the far end rattled softly as though touched by the storm, though no wind should have reached it. The traveler's breath came shallow. Every instinct told them to sit, to pretend none of this had happened, to close their eyes and wait for morning. But their legs carried them toward the fire instead. The embers glowed faintly, fighting to stay alive. The traveler crouched down, feeding the hearth a few pieces of wood from the pile stacked nearby. For a moment, the flames hesitated. Then, with a reluctant crack, they flared upward, spilling more light across the hall. The light revealed the photographs again. The hunting parties, the stiff-faced families, the blurred children. Only now the traveler thought they saw something new. In the photograph of the hunters there was a gap. A space between two men where nothing should have been. Yet the edges of the figures on either side bent inward slightly, as if they were leaning away from something. Something missing. Something invisible. The traveler blinked, leaning closer. The light of the fire wavered, casting flickers across the glass frame. When they looked again, the gap was gone. The hunters stood shoulder to shoulder as before, faces stiff, eyes hollow. A log cracked loudly in the fire. Sparks hissed. The traveler jerked back, pulse hammering in their throat. They forced themselves into the chair again, curling slightly as if the fire could protect them. The warmth reached their skin but not their bones. The cold of the window, the image of that pale face, still clung to them. And then, from somewhere deeper in the lodge, a sound answered the storm. A slow, deliberate knock. 3 sharp raps against wood. The traveler froze, staring at the dark hallway. The sound did not come from the front door nor the windows. It came from within, from a door deeper in the building. The knocking stopped, and the whisper returned. Not from outside this time. From inside the lodge. It was closer now. More distinct. And this time the traveler understood. It was saying their name. The name hung in the air like smoke. Not shouted. Not even spoken in full voice. Just whispered, steady, patient. The kind of whisper that feels as though it curls directly into your ear even when no one is near you. The traveler did not move at first. They gripped the arms of the leather chair, nails digging into cracked seams, staring at the hallway where the sound had come from. The fire hissed and popped behind them, its warmth a fragile shield against the cold that pressed from every side. The whisper came again, this time softer. Their name drawn out like a sigh. The traveler swallowed hard, throat dry, body stiff. The storm outside rattled the lodge, the rain lashing harder against the windows, but all of it seemed distant now, muffled, as though the whisper was the only sound that mattered. Finally, as though pulled by something stronger than themselves, the traveler stood. Each step toward the hallway felt heavier than the last. The boards creaked underfoot, the sound sharp in the stillness, as if the house disapproved of their movement. Shadows shifted along the walls, stretched long and crooked by the firelight. The corridor ahead gaped open like a throat, its dark edges lined with doors. The lodge was larger than it had first seemed. The traveler had noticed only the main hall, the hearth, and the photographs when they first arrived. But now, as they entered the hallway, they realized how deep the building went. Door after door lined the narrow passage, their surfaces old and scarred, some swollen from years of dampness. The air here was colder, thicker. It smelled faintly of mold and earth, as though the walls themselves had absorbed centuries of rain. The whisper drifted again. Closer. Always closer. The traveler's hand brushed along the rough wall as they moved forward, grounding themselves against the pull of fear that urged them to turn back. The storm outside roared, wind whistling through unseen cracks, but inside the hall there was no motion, no draft. The air hung heavy, stagnant. The first door on the left groaned faintly. The traveler stopped, pulse pounding in their ears. They stared at the handle, rusted iron, streaked with dark stains. It twitched once, as if something had brushed against it from the other side. They did not touch it, could not. Instead, they pressed forward, heart hammering harder with each step. The second door was worse. Its wood was split down the middle, as though something had struck it long ago. From the crack seeped a faint sound, like breathing. Slow, rhythmic. The traveler froze, leaned in. Yes, breathing. Someone, or something, was behind that door. Their chest tightened, breath catching as the whisper came again. Not from behind this door, but farther ahead, calling them forward, drawing them deeper. With trembling hands, they backed away, eyes fixed on the broken wood. They half expected it to splinter open, for whatever breath behind it to emerge. But the door held. The third door was slightly ajar. A thin line of black separated it from its frame. The traveler's eyes adjusted, but the gap revealed nothing. Only darkness. The whisper now slithered from behind that gap, softer than before, but certain. Their name, over and over, patient, inviting. The traveler's breath quickened. Sweat prickled their palms despite the cold. They reached out without meaning to, fingertips brushing the wood. It was damp, soft in places, almost rotten. They leaned closer to the gap, heart beating in their throat, and peered inside. Nothing, just blackness. Yet as they lingered, straining their eyes, a single pale hand appeared in the gap. It pressed flat against the wood, palm outward, fingers long and splayed as though reaching for theirs. The traveler stumbled back, gasping, their shoulder colliding with the opposite wall. The hand slid away into the dark. The gap sealed itself with a sharp creak, the door now fully closed. The corridor felt narrower, tighter. The walls seemed to lean inward. The traveler's breath came fast, shallow, misting faintly in the cold air. They pressed forward again, driven not by courage but by the strange pull of the whisper. They hated it, feared it, but they could not ignore it. Each time they thought to turn back, the sound of their name filled their head again, more insistent, as if it lived inside their skull. At the far end of the corridor stood the final door. It was different from the rest. Taller, heavier, iron-bound, with black hinges that glistened faintly in the dim light. The wood was darker too, almost black, as though it had been scorched. A strange symbol was carved into its center, circular, jagged lines weaving together like thorns. The whisper was louder here, so loud that it drowned out the storm, so loud that it seemed to be coming from the wood itself. The traveler froze before it, their hand hovering just above the cold iron handle. Their mind screamed to run, to flee the lodge, to vanish into the storm if they must. But their body would not obey. The handle turned, on its own, Slowly, the travelers staggered back, heart crashing against their ribs, as the heavy door creaked open an inch. The whisper stopped. The silence was worse. And from that thin opening, a breath escaped, hot, damp, and foul, spilling across the traveler's face. Not a whisper this time. Not a voice. Just the sound of something alive waiting in the dark. The breath that slipped from the blackened door clung to the traveler's skin. It was heavy, damp, warmer than the icy air in the corridor, carrying with it the sour rot of wet soil and something faintly metallic, like rust or blood. The traveler gagged, raising a sleeve over their face, stumbling back until their shoulders pressed against the opposite wall. The whisper did not return. The silence was worse, too deep, as if the whole lodge was holding itself still. Even the storm outside seemed muted here, muffled by the weight of what pressed behind the door. The iron handle twitched, turned another inch. The traveler's legs screamed to run, but their body rooted to the spot. Their eyes locked on the sliver of darkness now revealed through the gap. A thin strand of condensation curled out from it, as though the darkness itself breathed. The wood groaned. The hinges whined. The gap widened another fraction of an inch. The traveler's heart thudded painfully in their ears. They bit down on a cry, forcing themselves to edge sideways along the corridor, shoes squealing against damp boards. Their gaze never left the black opening. Something moved in there. Not clearly, not fully, but just beyond the threshold, shapes shifted. Pale, formless shapes, like the suggestion of faces pressing against glass. One melted into another. A hand stretched. Fingers twitched. A mouth opened soundlessly, wide, too wide, then dissolved back into the dark. The traveler's stomach lurched. They turned, sprinting back down the hallway, shoes hammering on the warped floorboards. Their breath tore from their chest, loud and ragged, bouncing off the walls. Behind them, the door groaned again, the iron hinges screaming as if something inside was pushing harder. They burst into the main hall, nearly tripping on the rug before the hearth. The fire had nearly died again, smoldering to faint orange threads. The storm outside roared, rain hammering the lodge with a fury that matched the traveler's racing pulse. They grabbed the iron poker, jabbing it into the embers until sparks flared. Flames leapt upward with a reluctant gasp, filling the room with warmth that felt weaker than it should. The traveler dropped into the chair, chest heaving, gripping the poker as though it were a weapon. The corridor yawned behind them, black and silent. Minutes passed, then an hour. No sound. The door did not open farther. The whisper did not return. Only the storm spoke, and the fire crackled faintly as the new logs caught flame. The traveler's eyelids burned from exhaustion, but fear kept them from closing. Every time their head dipped, every time their vision blurred, the memory of the pale shapes in the doorway jerked them upright again. At last they rose and crossed the hall to the window. Rain streaked the glass, twisting the world outside into watery smears. The forest swayed in the storm, branches whipping, trees bending. But as the travelers stared harder, they saw something wrong. The trees weren't moving with the wind. They were moving against it. The rain blew one way, the trees another. The motion wasn't random, it was rhythmic. Almost like swaying. Almost like breathing. The traveler stepped back from the window, chest tight. The fire behind them snapped sharply, like a bone breaking. Then came the knock. Not from the corridor this time. From the front door. 3 heavy raps. Slow. Deliberate. The traveler froze in the center of the hall, staring at the door. Water dripped from the frame, rain seeping through old cracks. The lantern outside flickered weakly, its glow bending in the storm. The knocking came again. Louder. The traveler's hands shook as they gripped the poker tighter, knuckles white. Their heart thundered in their chest. They waited for the third knock. It didn't come. Instead, a voice floated through the door. Not a whisper. Not the voice from the corridor. This one was clearer, sharper, like someone standing on the porch just beyond the wood. "Let me in." The traveler's blood went cold. They stepped backward slowly, shaking their head. No, they would not open the door. The voice came again. "Please, let me in. It's cold. Please." It was a woman's voice, thin, trembling, desperate. The traveler's jaw clenched. The voice tugged at something human inside them, something sympathetic. But no, not after what they'd seen. Not after the face in the window. They moved toward the fire again, forcing their gaze away from the door. Then came the third knock, harder than the others. The wood shuddered in its frame. "Let me in." The voice was closer now, almost inside. The traveler whipped around, eyes wide. The door had not moved, but the voice hadn't come from behind it this time. It had come from the hall, from the corridor, from the black door at the far end. The traveler dropped the poker, stumbling back until they nearly fell into the fire. Their throat burned with a scream they refused to release. And then, as the storm howled and the forest groaned and the fire hissed, the voice spoke one final time, clearer than ever, inside the hall, inside their head. "I know you can hear me." The door in the corridor slammed shut. The fire nearly went out, and the traveler realized the lodge wasn't just shelter from the storm. It was the storm's heart. The slam of the distant door echoed through the hall like a gunshot, rattling the windows in their frames. The traveler clutched at their chest, certain the sound would draw something forward, out of the corridor, out of the blackness, into the weak light of the fire. But nothing moved. The lodge held its breath. The storm raged on outside, the rain drumming in relentless sheets, the wind moaning through the eaves. Yet here, within the heavy timbers and stone, the silence pressed tighter, heavier, until the traveler could hear only the desperate hammering of their own heart. They dropped into the chair before the fire, poker clattering onto the hearthstone, sparks hissing upward. The fire had nearly died again, its glow fragile, embers straining against the cold that seeped from the corridor. With shaking hands, the traveler fed more wood into the flames, watching as the fire reluctantly caught, smoke curling upward in slow, unwilling spirals. They told themselves it was fine. The door had shut. Whatever it was, whatever whispered from the corridor, whatever called through the walls, was locked away again. The lodge was just an old building, groaning with age and storm. The voices were tricks of exhaustion. The faces were tricks of the fire. But the words "I know you can hear me" clung to their mind like a sickness. They pressed their palms into their eyes, dragging slow breaths into their lungs, fighting the dizziness that came with panic. Sleep was impossible, yet their body craved it. Each time their head dipped, their mind jolted awake again, whispering that if they closed their eyes, the door would open and something would step through. The minutes stretched into hours. The storm outside refused to fade. And then, a sound, faint at first beneath the rain, but they're undeniable. Footsteps. Not in the hall. Not inside. Outside. The traveler stiffened, breath caught. The footsteps squelched softly in the mud, pacing across the porch. They circled, slow and deliberate, like someone inspecting the lodge. Rain splashed louder, as though the storm was masking their approach. The traveler crawled low to the nearest window, peering through the rain-streaked glass. The forest outside was a blur, trees bending unnaturally in the storm's fury. The lantern on the porch guttered, barely alive, its glow bending and stretching in the downpour. And then, between streaks of rain, the traveler saw it. A figure. Not close. Not fully revealed. But just beyond the lantern's dying halo, something tall, unmoving, half-concealed in the mist. Its shoulders hunched forward, its head tilted unnaturally to one side, as though it had been broken long ago. Lightning flashed. The porch was empty. The traveler flinched back, choking on a gasp, fingers digging into the damp wood of the windowsill. When the thunder rolled a heartbeat later, it sounded less like thunder and more like a groan, a long, low bellow that seemed to come from beneath the ground itself. The footsteps resumed, louder now, on the porch, right outside the door. The traveler staggered backward, shaking their head, whispering "no, no, no" over and over, as though the repetition could hold the door shut. The fire spat sparks, throwing jagged shadows across the walls. A knock. Not 3 this time. 1. Heavy. The wood shuddered in its frame, dust falling from the beams overhead. The traveler pressed against the far wall, staring at the door, muscles coiled to run, but where? Into the corridor, toward the black door? Into the forest, into the storm that bent the trees backward against the wind? Another knock. The traveler whimpered despite themselves, hands trembling uncontrollably. The voice returned. "Please. It's so cold out here." It was the same voice as before, the woman's, thin and pleading. But now there was something else beneath it. Something deeper. A second tone, faint but present, vibrating in the bones of the lodge itself. "Let me in." The travelers shut their eyes, covered their ears, rocked against the wall like a child. The voice seeped through anyway. "Let me in." When they opened their eyes, the door had shifted. Just slightly. The wood swollen outward, as though something pressed against it from the other side. Rainwater trickled through new cracks along the frame, running in crooked streams across the floor. The traveler bolted to the hearth, grabbing the poker again, brandishing it toward the door, though their hands shook so hard the iron rattled. The storm roared louder. The wind screamed. The fire nearly guttered out entirely. And then, silence. The knocking stopped. The voice stopped. The footsteps ceased. The traveler remained frozen, weapon raised, eyes locked on the door. Sweat dripped into their eyes. Their chest heaved with each shallow breath. And then, from behind them, from the corridor, a whisper. Not their name this time. Not a plea. Just laughter. Drat. Hollow. Cruel. The traveler spun, firelight quivering across the black hallway. The doors stood silent. Closed. But the laugh echoed there, seeping from every seam, from the very wood itself. The traveler's knees buckled, but they forced themselves upright, staring down that long corridor where the black door waited. The laugh grew louder, overlapping with itself, as if many voices now joined in chorus. The lodge creaked. The beams shuddered. The fire hissed. And as the traveler stood trembling in the hall's dim glow, they realized the truth that froze their blood more than the whispers, more than the knocks, more than the laughter itself. The lodge was not keeping something out. It was keeping something in. And the storm was only there to make sure no one left. The laughter died slowly, fading not as sound fades but as if it were sucked away, pulled back into the wood and stone of the lodge itself. In the silence that followed, the traveler realized they had been holding their breath. Their chest burned. They gasped, the sound of their own lungs far too loud in the stillness. The fire struggled behind them, throwing weak orange light across the hall. Every log seemed to burn reluctantly, as though the flames resented being alive. The traveler clutched the poker, staring at the corridor where the laughter had echoed, afraid to move, more afraid to stay still. And then their eyes shifted upward. The ceiling above the hearth was a dark lattice of beams and rafters, thick with cobwebs, swollen with damp. But tucked into the far corner, almost hidden in the shadows above the fire, a staircase climbed steeply upward. Its base was barely visible from the hall, just a jagged set of steps leading into darkness. The traveler's heart sank. They hadn't noticed it before. And now, seeing it, they couldn't shake the feeling that the staircase hadn't been there until this very moment. A creak came from above. Slow, heavy, deliberate. The traveler froze, the poker trembling in their hands. Another creak followed, closer to the top of the stairs. The sound of weight shifting across the boards. Someone, or something, was up there. The storm outside pounded harder, as though urging them forward, daring them to climb. The fire hissed. The corridor behind them yawned black. The front door gleamed wet with rain. No escape. The traveler's breath shook as they approached the base of the stairs. The wood there was damp and warped, each step darkened with years of rot. The air grew colder, thicker, carrying with it the smell of mildew and something sharper, like charred hair. The first step moaned under their weight. The sound was too loud, a crack that carried through the entire lodge. The second step followed. Another groan, as though the staircase resented their presence. The fire below flickered harder, casting their shadow up the walls in long, distorted shapes that reached into the rafters. The third step. And then, above them, silence. Whatever had moved before no longer stirred. The air was heavier, pressing on the traveler's chest, slowing their breath. They gripped the railing, though the wood was slick with damp and left their palms smeared with black. Halfway up they stopped. Their bodies screamed to turn back, to retreat to the hall, to cling to the fire as long as it lasted. But the whisper returned, curling down from the top of the stairs. Not their name this time. Not laughter. Just two words, clear as glass. Come see. The traveler's vision swam. Their knees trembled. They could not answer, could not speak, but they climbed, step after step. The top of the stairs revealed a landing, narrow and crooked, lined with doors just like the corridor below. The roof slanted sharply here, beams pressing low, ceiling dripping with moisture. The air was stale, heavy with dust that scratched the throat. The first door to the left was ajar. A faint glow leaked from the crack, not firelight but something colder, paler. The traveler reached out with shaking fingers, pushing the door open. The hinges screeched, the sound piercing in the silence. Inside was a bedroom. At least it had once been. The walls sagged with water damage, wallpaper peeling in long strips. The bed was nothing but a collapsed frame, mattress blackened with rot, sheets fused into a single hardened crust. A broken lamp leaned on the nightstand, its bulb shattered long ago. But it wasn't the decay that froze the traveler's blood. It was the figure sitting in the corner. A woman, or something shaped like one. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, hair stringy and wet, clinging to her face. Her dress was stained dark, heavy with water, dripping onto the boards beneath her. Her head was tilted downward, chin nearly touching her chest, as though she were asleep. The pale glow came from her skin. It shimmered faintly in the dark, too bright, too wrong, like a reflection without a source. The traveler's throat closed. They stumbled back a step, nearly falling into the hall. The woman's head jerked upward. Her eyes were open. What? Empty. The traveler screamed before they knew it, slamming the door shut, back pressed hard against the wood. Their heart raced so fast it felt like it would burst through their ribs. Silence. The door stayed closed. The room stayed quiet. But as the traveler backed away, trembling, another door creaked open farther down the hall. Then another. And another. Each one groaned wide on its hinges, spilling darkness into the narrow landing, as though the entire upstairs was waking. The whisper slithered through the rafters, weaving between beams and dripping from the ceiling. Come see. Come see. Come see. The traveler bolted, stumbling toward the far end of the hall, away from the opening doors, away from the pale light. Their shoes slipped on wet boards, their hand clutching the railing of the stairs that curved upward again, toward a third floor. The steps there were narrower, steeper, as though the lodge had been built higher than it should have been. The whisper chased them upward. Doors banged open behind them. The floor trembled. By the time they reached the next landing, their chest heaved, their arms shook, their legs felt weak as lead. This floor had only one door. Tall. What? Ironbound. The same door from the corridor below. The traveler's stomach dropped. Their body went cold. How could it be here too? The whisper stopped. And from behind the door, a single knock answered. The knock echoed through the entire lodge, a hollow thud that shook the beams above the traveler's head and rattled dust from the rafters. They froze in place, every nerve screaming, poker still clutched tight in one sweaty hand. It hadn't been loud. Not the kind of pounding one might expect from something desperate to escape. It was polite, measured, almost like the knock of a visitor waiting to be welcomed inside. That quietness was somehow worse. The black door loomed at the end of the crooked landing. Its surface gleamed slick in the dim light, as though it were damp like stone left in rain. Iron bands wrapped around it, thick and rusted, biting deep into the wood. No handle. No keyhole. Just that door standing where it should not be. Another knock. Slow. Patient. The traveler's mouth went dry. They could barely hear the storm outside anymore. It was as if the rain had hushed itself to listen. Even the fire 2 floors below seemed to falter. They turned, half prepared to run back down the stairs, but the sight that met them froze their legs. The doors behind them, the ones that had groaned open earlier, were still wide, spilling blackness into the hall. But now figures stood in the thresholds. Not fully seen but hinted at. Shapes that leaned too far into the light, bending where spines should not bend, arms stretching too long, heads cocked at angles that suggested neither curiosity nor kindness. They did not move forward. They only watched, silent, waiting. The traveler's breath rasped in their throat. They turned back toward the black door, heart pounding in their ears. It felt as though they were being pushed toward it, corralled not by force but by inevitability. Another knock. This one deeper, heavier. The boards beneath their feet groaned. The iron straps seemed to shiver as though straining against something behind them. The traveler gripped the poker tighter, their knuckles white, their minds screaming to resist, to turn, to hurl themselves back down the stairs and out into the storm. But the whisper returned, curling through the beams like smoke. Come see. The words stroked the inside of their skull, sliding between thoughts, sinking into marrow. Their hand rose against their will, fingertips grazing the iron bands. The surface was icy, a cold that bit into skin as though the metal had been left out under winter stars. The traveler's breath hitched. The knock came again. But this time it wasn't from the other side. It came from inside their chest. A thump. Heavy. Wrong. Their own heart answered. They staggered back, clutching their ribs. Pain seared across their body, sharp and sudden, as though invisible hands were squeezing their lungs. The door groaned, with bowing outward. A line split down the center, thin as a paper cut, glowing faintly with pale light. Behind them the shape stirred. Their breathing filled the landing now, ragged and damp. The traveler had to choose. They stumbled forward, pressing both hands against the crack in the door. The light seared their palms, but they pushed. The iron straps trembled, the wood moaned, and the gap widened. Through it, the traveler glimpsed something that should never be seen. Not a room. Not a space at all. It was endless. A churning void, swirling with shadows that writhed like living smoke. Faces emerged and vanished within them. Mouths stretching too wide, eyes too deep, whispers clawing over each other until they became a roar. The cold hit first. A frost that sank deep into bone, that made the air too heavy to breathe. Then came the smell, burnt flesh, damp earth, copper sharp as blood. The traveler's vision blurred. They should have turned away. Should have slammed the door shut. But the whisper was louder now, no longer soft, no longer coaxing. It was a chorus, 100 voices stacked into one command. Come see. And then the door flew open. The light exploded, swallowing the landing, swallowing the traveler whole. They screamed, but no sound left their throat. Their body was dragged forward, pulled into the void, arms outstretched, poker slipping uselessly from their grasp. They fell. Not down, not forward, just fell as though gravity had lost all meaning. The void swallowed them, shadows reaching like claws, whispering in voices that scraped the inside of their skull. Images flashed in their mind, flames roaring through the lodge, rain flooding the forest, faces pressed against windows that hadn't been there before. And then silence. The traveler gasped, their body slamming hard against a wooden floor. The impact rattled teeth, drove air from their lungs. They coughed, scrambling to their knees, clutching their chest. The fire was there again, crackling weakly in the hearth. They were back in the great hall. The corridor stretched before them. The storm rattled the windows. The poker lay beside the hearth, exactly where they had first picked it up. The black door was gone. The traveler's heart hammered as realization dawned. Time hadn't passed. The storm hadn't shifted. The fire hadn't burned lower. It was as though they had never left the hall. And yet, their palms still burned, seared red with the mark of the iron bands. And in the silence between the thunder, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of knocking. Not above, not behind a door, from inside the walls. The travelers stood frozen before the hearth, their breath clouding in the lodge's damp, heavy air. The poker lay at their feet, its iron surface dark and slick with ash. But they could not bend to pick it up. Their ears strained, every nerve drawn tight as a bowstring, listening to the sound that should not be. Knocking. Soft. Rhythmic. It came from inside the walls. At first it was faint, as though distant, like someone rapping politely on wood from far away. But then, as the traveler's eyes darted over the warped boards, the sound grew louder, spreading, crawling closer until it seemed to surround them. Knock. 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 The walls quivered with it, dust sifting from the rafters. The traveler's pulse quickened. They spun toward the corridor, half expecting the black door to have returned, but it had not. The hallway gaped open, doors cracked, shadows crouching just beyond reach of the fire's glow. Knock. Knock. This time from the left wall. They staggered back, heart racing. Their shoulder brushed the edge of the hearth, and for a brief moment the fire flared, flames snapping upward as if in warning. Then silence. The traveler clung to it, hoping, praying, that it had ended. But silence here was never mercy. Silence was only waiting. The knock returned, louder. From the ceiling above. The traveler's gaze shot upward. The beam stretched high, blackened with damp, crowded with cobwebs. Shadows pooled thick between them, swaying faintly as though something moved just beyond sight. The knock repeated, deliberate now. Knock. 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 Then came the dragging. A sound like fingernails or bones being scraped across wood, long and drawn out, moving slowly above their head. The traveler's skin crawled. Their body trembled. They pressed their back against the stone of the fireplace, clutching for the poker with fumbling fingers, needing its weight, needing anything to hold between themselves and that sound. The dragging stopped, and the whisper returned. Not from the rafters, not from the corridor, from inside the wall beside them. So close it felt as though it came from just an inch away, words pressed against the other side of the boards, bleeding through the cracks. Let me in. The traveler's vision blurred. Their throat closed. Their hand found the poker's handle at last, iron biting into their palm. The wall thudded hard. Once, twice. Boards rattled. Dust shook loose, peppering the floor. Then silence again. The traveler dared a step toward the corridor, the poker raised in trembling hands. The fire crackled weakly behind them, light chasing their shadow down the narrow hall. Each door along its length yawned half open, hinges creaking with the storm's breath. And from inside those rooms came the sound. Knocking. Not one, not two, but dozens of knocks. Walls rattling, doors shuddering, floors booming beneath hidden weight. Each knock was in rhythm, a heartbeat hammering in the wood. The traveler's breath hitched as they realized the rhythm was not random. It matched their own pulse. They clutched their chest, stumbled back, nearly dropping the poker. Their heart thumped against their ribs, too loud, too fast, and with every beat the knocking grew harsher, louder, until it drowned out the storm entirely. The corridor shuddered with it. Doors trembled. The floor quaked. The rafters above groaned as if the entire lodge were alive, its bones straining under something immense. The traveler bolted, running blind, boots striking the boards as they tore down the corridor, passing the yawning doorways where shadows stirred, reaching, beckoning. Their chest burned, heart pounding faster, faster, feeding the knock until it became a roar. They stumbled through the hall, past the hearth, toward the front door where rain still beat against the glass. Their hand flew to the latch, wrenching it down, shoving hard. The door would not open. It shuddered, resisted, as though the storm outside pressed against it. The traveler pulled again, harder, screaming, iron poker clattering against the frame. And then they heard it. Not knocking, not whispering. A voice. Speaking from every wall at once. You opened the wrong door. The fire blew out. Darkness swallowed the hall. For a moment there was nothing. No storm, no sound, no breath. Then, from deep within the walls, the knocking started again. Slower now. Heavier. Not asking to be let in. Coming closer. The traveler stumbled backward, clutching the useless poker. Their eyes adjusted to the faint glow of the storm-lit windows, revealing the corridor stretching longer than before, doors lining both sides in endless repetition. Each one shook with the pounding inside. And at the far end, where the corridor should have ended, another door appeared. Tall, black, iron-bound. The same door. Waiting. The traveler's legs shook violently as they forced themselves toward the new black door at the far end of the corridor. Every step was met with resistance. The floorboards groaned beneath them, protesting each movement as though the lodge itself sought to stop them. The knocking inside the walls had slowed now, but it was heavier, deliberate, each beat echoing through their skull in perfect rhythm with their own terrified pulse. Shadows writhed along the hall, stretching unnaturally, climbing the walls, crawling across the ceiling as though the lodge's very structure was alive, watching, waiting. The traveler gripped the poker with both hands, knuckles white, and forced their gaze forward, unable to look away from the black door that gleamed wet and wrong at the end of the corridor. The closer they got, the colder the air became, as if some hidden frost had seeped through the floorboards and into the hall, frosting their breath with each exhale. Their chest burned, lungs straining, heart hammering, but still they moved, compelled by the same invisible force that had drawn them up the stairs and into the upstairs corridor. The walls on either side seemed to pulse faintly, beating like the pulse of the lodge itself, and the whisper returned, threading into their mind like a needle, soft yet insistent. Come see. The traveler's stomach twisted, nausea curling upward, but fear and compulsion outweighed every instinct to turn back. The iron bands on the door glimmered faintly, slick as if wet, though there was no rain up here, and the carved symbol in its center, a jagged circle of thorns, seemed to pulse faintly, alive. They raised the poker, pressing it against the cold metal as though it were a talisman, and finally, with a sound like the lodge itself exhaling, the door creaked open. Beyond it lay blackness that was deeper than mere absence of light. It was the kind of darkness that seemed to swallow sound, absorb the heat of the fire from the floor below, and curl around the traveler like a living thing. They hesitated at the threshold, shivering, unsure if stepping inside would destroy them or simply trap them forever in this void. A voice came then, low and guttural, resonating not from the void itself but from inside their head, inside their bones. Welcome. The traveler's body froze as cold air, not wind, not rain, but something colder, whipped around them, pressing against their skin, crawling along their arms and legs. The floor beneath the void felt soft, impossibly soft, almost liquid, and when they stepped forward, their feet sank slightly as if the very ground were waiting to consume them. Shapes moved inside the darkness, faces fleeting, blurred, appearing and vanishing in an instant. Eyes opened too wide, mouths stretched impossibly, and hands reached, stretching toward the traveler with unnatural length, twitching, curling, dissolving into smoke only to reappear closer. The poker slipped from their grip, clattering to the invisible floor, and yet the traveler could not pull back, could not flee. The whisper became many voices, layered atop one another, overlapping, screaming, begging, mocking. See. And then, as they stepped fully into the darkness, the door slammed behind them. The sound was final, absolute, and the corridor, the hall, the lodge itself seemed to vanish, leaving only the void. The traveler fell forward, hands scraping against the yielding black floor, and as they tried to rise, the shapes coalesced into forms more real than anything they had seen before. Figures draped in wet, tattered clothing, faces pale and glistening, eyes sunken yet unblinking, pressed around them, forming a circle. Their mouths moved soundlessly, but the traveler could feel the words crawling into their mind, words not spoken but implanted. You cannot leave. You came. You must see. Panic erupted, muscles tightening, heart hammering, but even as they scrambled backward, the figures advanced effortlessly, gliding over the soft black surface, impossibly fast, their forms distorting, elongating, twisting. The traveler fell onto their back, chest heaving, and as they looked up, they saw it. A larger figure at the center, taller than the rest, a shadow crowned in something that resembled both flame and smoke, eyes like molten metal, and it spoke, voice low and resonant, vibrating through the traveler's skull. The lodge is alive. The storm is its heartbeat. You were chosen to witness, to witness. A cold dread filled every fiber of the traveler's being as the smaller figures pressed closer, whispering, moaning, and the tall shadow raised a hand, long and thin, tipped with something sharp, and the traveler understood in that instant that they were no longer merely a guest in the lodge. They were part of its story, part of its hunger, and the storm outside, the rain, the wind, the lightning, all of it was a chorus, a prelude to something far larger, a pulse they had now entered. The traveler tried to scream, tried to run, but the floor shifted beneath them, rolling like water, and the black figures rose higher, their forms bending, melting, merging into one incomprehensible mass of shadow, whispering in 1,000 voices, "See, understand, join." And as the void stretched infinitely above and below, the traveler realized that the lodge, the storm, the black door, and the endless shadows were no longer separate from them. The fear in their chest became something tangible, something alive, and the whispers, the knocks, the laughter, and the voices inside the walls coalesced into one, a single command that vibrated through every bone, every nerve, every heartbeat. You are ours now. The traveler felt themselves falling, though there was no up or down, only the endless blackness that pressed in on every side. The weight of it was physical, as though the shadows themselves bore down on their body, tugging at their limbs, tugging at their mind. Every instinct screamed to fight, to run, to claw their way back to something solid, something real, but the void offered no grip, no leverage. Even their breath felt different here, thicker, colder, filling their lungs with frost that burned. Around them, the black figures moved in waves, folding and unfolding, their forms impossible to describe, stretching and compressing in ways that should have been physically intolerable. Faces flickered, twisted, and then dissolved, leaving nothing but the suggestion of a presence. Their eyes, too many eyes, blinked and stared, though none looked directly at the traveler. Some hovered overhead, others embedded in the floor or ceiling, moving in impossible directions, always observing, always waiting. The traveler's pulse raced, not with fear but with a sickening sense of inevitability. They realized that whatever this place was, it had known they would come long before they had entered the lodge. A whisper rippled through the void, soft at first, like wind moving through dry leaves, and then louder, layered voices stacking atop one another until every nerve in the traveler's body vibrated with the sound. See, understand, join? They could feel it beneath their skin, curling in their veins, twisting their thoughts. The voices were not simply in their ears, they were in their head, in their memory, in the marrow of their bones. The traveler wanted to scream, but the sound never left their throat. Their mouth opened, air expelled, yet only silence responded. One of the figures glided closer, smoother than water, its shape suggesting a person but never fully resolving. The traveler could see the suggestion of a face, pale, wet, distorted, and a single eye blinked, impossibly large, impossibly bright, holding a universe of malice. The eye fixed on them, unblinking, and the traveler felt their own pupils dilate involuntarily. The figure extended a hand, long and crooked, tipped with something blackened and sharp, and for a moment the traveler's body obeyed some ancient command, inching forward despite every instinct screaming to retreat. Then another figure emerged behind the first, and another, until the traveler was surrounded on all sides. They could not count them. There were too many, and their forms overlapped, intertwining, folding into each other like smoke in a windless sky. Whispers pressed into the traveler's ears, mouth and mind simultaneously, phrases repeating in strange, inverted patterns that made their thoughts tangle. You are ours, you belong, you see now. Every word burned into them, echoing across the endless void, vibrating in sync with a rhythm they could not name but could feel in their bones. The traveler fell to their knees, hands clutching their head, teeth gritting as the voices amplified. They thought of the lodge, of the storm outside, of the corridor and the black doors, trying desperately to anchor themselves to something tangible. But the void would not allow it. Their memories, their identity, even the sensation of their own body was slipping, unraveling, dissolving into the blackness. Then a single voice cut through the chorus, sharper than any sound before. It was the deep shadow, the tallest figure at the center, its eye like molten metal staring directly into the traveler's mind. Look, it said. The command was undeniable, a pulse that forced the traveler to lift their gaze. All around them the void shifted. Walls of black smoke receded, revealing glimpses of scenes, twisted reflections of the lodge, corridors stretching into impossible angles, trees bending backward in the storm, flames crawling up the rafters as if alive. The travelers saw themselves reflected in windows that should not exist, running, screaming, falling, and yet moving in ways they could not have done. Every version of themselves was trapped, mirrored, observed. The whispering voices were now laughing, and the laughter was theirs, and yet it was not theirs. The shadow extended its hand again. This time, the traveler felt a pull, not from outside but from within, as if something had attached to the very core of them and was dragging them forward. Panic surged, muscles screaming, but their body no longer fully belonged to them. Step by step, they moved deeper into the void, drawn toward the molten eye, toward something vast and unknowable at the center. Around them, the smaller figures pressed closer, the eye-like shapes from the walls now spinning slowly, each blink synchronized with the pulse of their chest, until the traveler realized with horror that their own heartbeat had been co-opted. Every beat echoed across the void, setting rhythm to the endless black forms. The traveler tried to resist, tried to stop, but resistance was futile. Thoughts tangled with the whispers, "You came. You chose. You will see." The figures began to hum now, low and resonant, a vibration that shook the traveler to their core. The void was alive, breathing, thinking, feeding on their fear and now their awe. It was not simply a place but a being, infinite and patient, and the traveler was merely the newest witness, the newest component in its awareness. And then the shadow spoke again, a voice that rolled through the blackness, inside their mind and inside their bones simultaneously. "You have seen the surface. You have felt the hunger. Now see the heart." The traveler's vision went black for an instant, then opened to something beyond comprehension. The void stretched infinitely, and at its center, a massive pulse of energy throbbed, dark and radiant at once, like molten obsidian fused with fire. Around it, the smaller shadows spun, weaving patterns that seemed to breathe, to grow, to devour themselves and then recreate endlessly. The traveler realized with a bone-deep chill that the lodge, the storm, the black doors, the corridors, the whispers, and even the rain were emanations of this central heart. All of it existed to draw in, to observe, to feed. And they were here now, standing, or kneeling, or floating, in its attention. A shiver ran through their body. Pain and awe and fear mixed, a cocktail that made them dizzy, nearly collapse. And yet, impossibly, they were conscious enough to feel the pull of understanding. They were part of the void now. A fragment of it, a witness, a prisoner, a seed. And the pulse at the center. It reached out to them with tendrils of thought, curiosity, hunger, and a promise. See more. Know more. Become more. The traveler's mind trembled, caught between terror and fascination, and as they stepped forward, pulled by a will not their own, they knew with a clarity that was both terrifying and inevitable that they would never leave this void unchanged. The lodge, the storm, the black doors, the shadows, the whispers, they were all the same entity, and now it had seen them. It had claimed them. And the void would show them everything it had ever seen, and everything it would ever want to show again, until the line between self and shadow was no longer discernible. The traveler fell fully into the heart of the void, and the black shapes swirled around them, carrying them, folding them, consuming them, and at the center, the molten-eyed shadow waited, watching, patient, and infinite. The traveler drifted, or perhaps fell, into the center of the void, though the sensation of movement had lost all meaning. There was no up, no down, no floor beneath their feet. Only the infinite blackness stretched in every direction, and the pulse at the center, slow at first, began to accelerate, reverberating through their bones like some colossal, living drum. The shadows that had circled them before now began to take shape more fully, though shape was an inadequate word. They were humanoid, yes, but distorted, each one bent and warped as if reflected in water. Limbs stretched at impossible angles, heads tilted in ways that made the traveler's stomach lurch. Their eyes, too many eyes, blinked in time with the pulse, watching, absorbing, cataloging. The molten-eyed shadow at the center did not move, yet its attention pressed on the traveler like a weight. A low hum rose from the shadows, resonant and all-encompassing, vibrating through the void, through the traveler's chest, and into the marrow of their bones. It was not sound, not exactly, but the traveler could feel it shaping the air and space around them. The smaller figures twined closer, tendrils of darkness brushing against their skin, cold and alive, probing. The traveler tried to recoil, tried to scream, but the void denied them, their body unresponsive to their commands. Fear twisted inside them, sharp as a knife, yet beneath that fear was something stranger. A prickling awe, the sense that the shadows were not merely hostile, they were intelligent. They were aware. They were curious. And then a voice whispered in their mind, 1,000 voices layered into one, shaping themselves into words that pressed against thought like heavy iron. Do you understand? The traveler shook their head violently, trying to push it away, but the whispers penetrated deeper, knitting themselves into memory, twisting recollection. You belong here. You are part of the lodge now. The storm, the doors, the corridors, the fire, they were all preparing you. Preparing us. Preparing yourself. The traveler staggered backward, though again backward was meaningless, but the central shadow did not advance. It extended tendrils of black smoke, reaching into the smaller forms surrounding the traveler, weaving them into patterns, constructing a lattice that pulsed with the rhythm of that terrible central heartbeat. The traveler's vision swam, the shadows bending around them, teasing glimpses of impossible spaces, endless corridors, windows into the storm-lashed forest, doors that twisted upward and into themselves, each one leading to a new horror, a new observation point, all feeding into the heartbeat at the center. A sudden sensation struck the traveler. Hunger. Not physical hunger, but something deeper, more primal. They were not merely observing the void. They were being observed, ingested, digested, their thoughts and fears consumed as nourishment. The shadows leaned closer, whispering, murmuring, probing with their impossible fingers. One trailed across the traveler's shoulder, cold and slick, leaving a trail of icy sensation that spread to their chest and spine. Panic surged, but their body no longer entirely obeyed. The more they tried to resist, the deeper the shadows pressed, not violently but inexorably, as if patient with every failing human instinct. Then the central shadow spoke aloud, a voice rolling through the void with the weight of mountains and the subtlety of a caress. See. The traveler's mind was drawn upward and outward at once. Around them, the void stretched into infinite patterns, intricate lattices of darkness threaded with pale light, each lattice alive, each thread a conduit of perception. The smaller figures swirled along these conduits, their forms folding, twisting, observing, recording. The traveler understood, if only for a moment, that the void itself was a living library, and the shadows were its librarians, and they were now an exhibit. Every step they had taken in the lodge, every knock on every wall, every door opened, all had been curated experiences designed to teach them something, to lead them here. The traveler's stomach dropped at the implication. The lodge had never been a place of refuge or shelter. It had been a lure, a training ground, a staging space. And now, here, at the heart of its consciousness, the void would teach them fully. The molten-eyed shadow leaned closer, eye fixed on the traveler, and tendrils of dark light brushed against their mind, teasing glimpses of the lodge in different iterations. Fire clawing along walls, corridors bending impossibly, windows glowing with rain that seemed to move on its own, shadows darting along the timber like living ink. And then, briefly, the traveler saw themselves, distorted, stretched, mirrored infinitely, screaming silently, trapped within the lattice of the void. Fear threatened to consume them entirely, but then the whisper shifted, softer now, intimate, coaxing. You may look. You may learn. But do not resist. The traveler's hands rose, almost of their own volition, to touch the nearest tendril. As their fingers brushed it, the darkness coiled around them, warm in a way that contradicted the cold, alive and sentient. They were flooded with sensation. Memories that were not theirs, feelings that were not theirs, landscapes that had never existed, sounds that had never sounded. They realized that the shadows did not merely consume, they shared. Every horror, every joy, every torment the void had ever encountered was laid before them, woven into a tapestry that stretched infinitely in every direction. And then the central shadow's voice, low and omnipresent, vibrated through their skull. To remain is to see. To see is to know. To know is to change. The traveler's mind teetered on the brink of comprehension, understanding both the vastness and the cruelty of what they were experiencing. They could feel their identity stretching, bending, folding, unmaking itself in the face of infinite observation. Yet through the fear and awe, one question burned brighter than any other. Could they survive this? Could they navigate the void without losing themselves entirely? The shadows leaned in, closer now, pressing against them from every angle. The smaller ones brushed and coiled, whispering fragments. Look, join, understand. The molten-eyed figure at the center raised a hand, pointing at the traveler, and the entire void pulsed in response. The traveler felt their own heartbeat synchronize with the pulse, and suddenly the void seemed to inhale through them, drawing their fear, their confusion, and their essence into its lattice. They were part of it now, partially, irrevocably, yet somehow aware enough to see, to perceive, to begin to comprehend. Then a sudden silence. The pulse stopped, the tendrils recoiled slightly, and the molten-eyed shadow's single voice resonated one final time. You have begun. But this is only the beginning. The lodge is patient. The storm is eternal. The shadows hunger, and now so do you. And the traveler understood, with a terror that shook them to the very core. There was no escape. There never had been. They were inside the heart of the lodge, inside the void, and the void had seen them. And now it would teach them everything. The traveler's awareness flickered like a dying lantern, half in this void and half in some lingering memory of the lodge. Every breath felt heavy, thick as oil. Every heartbeat a drumbeat that echoed in tandem with the pulse at the center of the infinite darkness. But here time had no meaning and space had even less. Seconds stretched into eternities, minutes collapsed into a single heartbeat, and yet the traveler remained conscious, painfully, impossibly aware of every sensation, every whisper, every twisting shadow that brushed against their mind. The molten-eyed figure at the center did not move but watched, and through its gaze, the traveler could feel the stretch and fold of existence itself, the infinite permutations of the lodge, of the storm, of every door they had opened, every step they had taken. At first, the traveler attempted to cling to something familiar. They pictured the hearth, the fire, the corridor with its yawning doors. But even that fragment of memory began to shift. The corridor lengthened endlessly, its walls breathing, doors opening and closing in impossible sequences. Sometimes the hallway curved upward, twisting into the ceiling, sometimes it split in two, one path plunging into water, the other climbing toward a sky full of stormlit trees. The traveler's mind strained to anchor itself, but the void pulled relentlessly, bending reality with patient malice. A whisper curled into their mind, soft and intimate, sliding over memory like water. Time is yours only as long as you allow it. Resist and you unravel. Obey and you see. Panic surged. The travelers shook their head violently, trying to push the thought away, but the void had already begun to unravel them. They felt the edges of themselves fraying, memories slipping like sand through fingers. Faces they loved, parents, friends, strangers they could not name, flickered, half-remembered, distorted by shadows. Their own reflection stared back at them from windows that should not exist, eyes wide and screaming, yet silent. And then the shadows began to move in patterns. Not chaotic, not random, but deliberate. They formed spirals, arcs, and lattices that pulsed with the central heartbeat. The traveler's mind, fragile and malleable, was drawn to follow, forced to trace the patterns with their gaze. The longer they stared, the more the void seeped into them, threading through thought and nerve until they felt their identity bending. A strange hunger rose within them, not for food, but for knowledge, for understanding, for the visions that the shadows could provide. To resist was agony. To follow was excruciating. A sudden tug of thought, the molten-eyed shadows pulled them forward. They stumbled, though there was no ground, no resistance, only the sensation of movement through a thick, cold medium. Shadows brushed their arms, legs, face, whispering in fragments. Look, become, understand. And with each whispered word, a memory, a fragment of themselves, was pressed into the lattice, catalogued, reshaped. They remembered their first steps into the lodge, the fire in the hearth, the laughter, the knocking in the walls. But now those events twisted into something else, something purposeful, rehearsed, a journey designed by the void itself. Then the void shifted again. The traveler felt it like a tidal wave, pulling them through multiple realities at once. They saw the lodge not as it was, but as it had been. Corridors burning with unseen flames, staircases climbing endlessly into darkness, windows glowing with unnatural rain, shadows writhing in every corner. They saw themselves at the hearth, at the black door, climbing stairs into the unknown, over and over like an infinite loop, each version slightly different, each more terrified than the last. And yet all of them were being watched. All of them catalogued. A sudden scream, or 1,000 screams layered into one, erupted from the shadows, vibrating through the void in the traveler's chest. Shapes pressed closer, pressing into memory, and for a moment the traveler thought they would be torn apart. But then the molten-eyed shadow extended a tendril, brushing against their mind, and everything froze. Time, perception, reality, all held still. The void hummed in a low, omnipresent resonance, and the traveler realized with bone-deep horror that it had paused them intentionally, showing them the consequences of disobedience, of failure, of resistance. You unravel, you see, you become nothing. Desperate, the traveler forced their gaze outward, past the lattice of shadows, past the infinite corridors, past the stormlit trees and the impossible black doors, seeking an anchor. And then they saw it, a flicker of light at the edge of perception, subtle, small, like a heartbeat separate from the void's pulse. It wasn't warm. It wasn't safe. But it was a thread, something external, a fragment not entirely consumed. The traveler reached toward it with every ounce of will left, feeling the shadows tug in opposition, whispering, hissing, coiling. Each step toward the light pulled more of their identity back into focus, but the void fought, bending thought, stretching memory, contorting fear into shapes that twisted their understanding of reality. As they drew closer, the light intensified, revealing a fragment of the lodge in clarity. The hearth, the fire faintly glowing, a corridor leading downward, the storm outside lashing the windows. The traveler's pulse synchronized with it now, heart hammering not with fear, but with the desperate need to cling to something tangible, something real, something that reminded them of who they were. But as their mind focused, the shadows reacted, surging forward in waves, twisting and forming faces, reaching hands that pressed invisibly into their consciousness. Their vision blurred, thoughts collided with impossible imagery, memories intertwined with shadows, until the traveler realized fully that the void had no mercy, no rules, no end. The lodge had never been a place. It was an organism, and the void was its consciousness, patient, infinite, insatiable. And yet the light remained. It was faint, flickering, but it existed. The traveler took a trembling step toward it, feeling the lattice of shadows writhe around them, whispering, laughing, pressing. Their body ached, their mind strained, but the urge to move, to survive, to retain themselves became overwhelming. And as they stepped fully toward the light, they understood something terrifying and exhilarating at once. The void could bend them, consume them, unravel them entirely, but it could not force their will entirely. They still had a choice, however slim. One step further, and the shadows recoiled slightly, as if tasting fear, as if noting defiance. The molten-eyed shadow at the center observed with patient intensity, a presence that filled all thought and space, yet allowed this minute act of agency. The traveler's heart surged with both hope and terror. They did not yet know if they would survive the void, if they could retain their identity, if they could ever escape. But for the first time since the black door had opened, they felt the fragile pulse of autonomy, a single thread of will that might yet guide them through the infinite, hungry darkness. And with that understanding, they stepped forward, into the lattice of shadows, toward the light, into the storm, and deeper into the lodge's consciousness than they had ever dared. As the traveler stepped deeper into the lattice of shadows, the void shifted again, folding and stretching around them in impossible ways. The small fragment of light ahead remained, flickering weakly but steadily, a heartbeat in contrast to the void's massive, pulsing rhythm. Every movement was an ordeal. The shadows pressed and recoiled, stretching into grotesque shapes, whispering words that sliced through the traveler's mind. You will see. You will become. You will unravel. Yet in their chest, the traveler felt the faint glimmer of defiance, a fragile will that had not yet been swallowed. Step by step, they advanced, each motion accompanied by the subtle sensation of the void testing them, probing them as though gauging the strength of their fear and resolve. Then, from the depths of the lattice, a new presence emerged. Not one of the shadows, nor one of the smaller humanoid shapes, but something older, heavier, denser. It moved slowly, deliberately, folding the blackness around it as it came. Its form was nearly impossible to perceive, one moment appearing as a massive, serpentine figure of smoke and shadow, the next flickering like a torn silhouette of the traveler themselves. And yet, the traveler sensed its awareness, vast and calculating, stretching tendrils of thought toward them before they could even see its shape clearly. The whispers around the traveler shifted. They grew more urgent, more desperate. Beware, beware, and yet the traveler could feel the tug of curiosity, the unrelenting pull of understanding that had drawn them into the void in the first place. The entity approached, coiling through the lattice, and with every movement, the shadows around the traveler bent and twisted, forming concentric patterns that hummed with a rhythm unlike the central pulse. The traveler's chest tightened, breath catching as the recognition hit. They were facing a force older than the void itself, a consciousness that had existed before the lodge, before the storm, before the black doors had opened to lure them. Who, what are you? The traveler's voice was swallowed instantly by the void, yet the entity responded, not with sound but directly within their mind. Its presence pressed against their thoughts like a tidal wave of cold, and a voice formed there, layered, infinite. I am the I beneath the lattice. I observe, I record, I shape. You are unusual. The traveler's pulse spiked. They staggered backward, though there was no ground beneath them, only the infinite blackness. The shadows recoiled in response, as though recognizing the authority of this new presence. And yet, the entity did not move to consume them. Instead, it watched, bending the void subtly, presenting visions, testing perception. The traveler felt a strange urge not to flee, but to look closer, to understand, even as terror gripped their mind. The lattice shifted, stretching the void into multiple layers. The traveler's mind reeled as they were shown impossible vistas. The lodge burning and regrowing endlessly, the forest twisted into geometric impossibilities, corridors folding upon themselves like origami. Each vision was accompanied by whispers and tendrils of shadow, pressing into memory, feeding off fear and awe. And yet, over it all, the entity observed them, probing their perception, nudging their attention toward fragments of clarity. A flicker of light here, a distortion of shadow there, a heartbeat not entirely of the void. "You are learning," the entity said, voice 1,000 harmonics layered into one. "Few retain the thread of self this long. Most unravel within cycles. Most become patterns, echoes, fragments." The traveler's chest tightened, their thoughts spinning, yet somewhere beneath the terror, a stubborn spark of recognition persisted. They were not entirely lost, not yet. They could see the lattice, understand its rhythms, trace the pulse of the shadows in ways others could not. The eye beneath the lattice was testing them, and they were beginning to pass. A sudden shift, a twist in perception, made the traveler stumble. The void rippled like water, and for a moment the lattice vanished, replaced by a vision of the lodge as it had been before the storm. The fire crackling in the hearth, rain slashing the windows, the corridors stretching normally, doors yawning open as if waiting for a visitor. The traveler felt a surge of relief, but it was fleeting. The entity's presence pressed in again, and the lodge bent into an impossible configuration. Staircases twisting, doors appearing where none had been, the storm outside coiling around itself. Shadows began to crawl over the walls, their whispering now threaded with amusement and curiosity. "You see, you move, you bend." The traveler understood then that they were not merely navigating the void, they were being taught to manipulate it. Their thoughts could influence the shadows, their attention could shape the lattice, and their will, fragile but persistent, could hold the flicker of light steady, even amid the all-consuming darkness. But each step required immense focus, and failure meant total unraveling, absorption into the void's endless memory. The eye beneath the lattice spoke again, softer this time, intimately. "To survive here, you must understand the hunger of shadows. You must see without becoming. You must witness without surrendering. Only then can you move beyond the lattice. Only then can you hope to return." The traveler swallowed, breath fogging in the cold, impossible void, and nodded, not out of obedience but determination. They would learn. They would endure. They would survive. And with that, the shadows shifted, forming a narrow path of relative clarity through the lattice. The traveler stepped forward, each movement deliberate, tracing the pulse of the void, feeling the tendrils of observation brush past without consuming them. The eye watched, patient, calculating, and the void began to stretch before the traveler in ways they could almost navigate, almost control, each step teaching them more about its impossible rules. Yet even as they moved, a whisper lingered at the edge of their consciousness, faint but insistent. "Not all who walk this path remain. Some are claimed entirely, some become the void itself." The traveler's chest tightened, but they pressed forward. Beyond the shadows, beyond the pulse, beyond the whispers, they sensed the next threshold approaching. A place the void had reserved for them, a test they could not yet see. And somewhere deep within the darkness, the molten-eyed shadow waited, patient, infinite, and knowing. The traveler moved through the void with cautious deliberation, every step a negotiation between will and the omnipresent pull of the shadows. The lattice twisted around them like a living maze, tendrils of black smoke brushing their arms, coiling around their legs, yet retreating slightly as if acknowledging the traveler's growing control. The flicker of light remained ahead, tenuous and fragile, a thread connecting them to a fragment of the lodge, to the echo of reality they still clung to. But beyond that thread lay the threshold, an unseen expanse where the void's hunger was strongest, where even the smallest lapse in focus could unmake them entirely. The molten-eyed shadow, colossal and patient, remained at the center, its gaze fixed, observing every twitch of thought, every wavering heartbeat, every flicker of fear. As the traveler approached the threshold, the void began to change. The lattice no longer formed neat paths. Instead, it coiled and braided, overlapping upon itself in impossible geometries, each layer pulsing with its own rhythm. Shadows twisted into shapes that resembled the traveler, distorted reflections of themselves with grotesque exaggerations. Elongated limbs, twisted faces, eyes stretched wide, mouths opening to scream silently. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, threading into their mind with fractal precision. "You will break, you will fold, you will become." The traveler felt a chill that ran through every fiber of their being, yet beneath the terror, a surge of defiance flickered. They were learning, adapting, manipulating the lattice subtly with their focus, bending its rhythm, tracing its patterns without losing themselves entirely. Then the threshold revealed itself. It was not a door, not a wall, not even a corridor. It was an expanse of pure darkness denser than the surrounding void, stretching infinitely, yet somehow finite. The pulse at the center accelerated, and the molten-eyed shadow's gaze seemed to pierce through the traveler's skull, pressing into their mind, their thoughts, their very soul. From the edges of the threshold, shapes began to emerge, larger, more defined than any the traveler had yet seen, their forms both human and impossible, faces frozen in expressions of fear, awe, and anguish, all reaching toward the traveler. Their whispering merged into a chorus that struck directly into memory and thought. "You are chosen. You are seen. You are ours." The traveler stumbled, falling to their knees on the intangible surface, hands scraping against the blackness that offered no support. They could feel the void trying to pull them apart, to unravel every thread of their being, yet the light flicker ahead persisted, guiding them, a fragile pulse of hope amid the omnipresent hunger. Their minds stretched, trying to hold on to self-awareness, to retain the sense of I, while the void attempted to rewrite their very essence. They reached for the light, and as their fingers brushed it, the threshold reacted violently, rippling outward in waves of shadow and sound. The distorted figures recoiled, twisting and folding upon themselves, yet the traveler could feel the pulse of the void synchronizing with their heartbeat, the lattice bending subtly in response to their focus. And then the entity in the center, the molten-eyed shadow, spoke within their mind, voice layered, infinite. To cross the threshold is to confront yourself entirely. To remain beyond it is to see all you are and all you could become. Will you endure or will you unravel? The traveler's mind spun, memories and fears merging with visions of impossible corridors, storm-lashed windows, and the black doors of the lodge. The whispers pressed harder, insistent, relentless. Fold, break, become, surrender. Yet somewhere deep within, the traveler grasped the faint pulse of defiance. They focused on the light, the tenuous flicker that connected them to reality, and with a conscious effort, they reached outward, tracing the lattice like threads on a loom. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to manipulate the shadows around them, weaving them into patterns, bending their movement without losing themselves. The distorted figures twitched and hissed in frustration, but the traveler persisted, pulse synchronized with the lattice's rhythm, while matched against the void's hunger. A single step forward, then another, until finally they approached the edge of the threshold. Here the void became more tangible. The blackness was thicker, heavier, almost suffocating, and the distorted figures loomed larger, whispering with voices that were now almost human in their cadence, yet layered with something alien, something eternal. "Do you see yourself? Do you understand? Will you survive?" The traveler faltered, nearly falling, nearly losing themselves to the pull of infinite fear, but a surge of clarity, fragile, burning, kept them upright. They realized the threshold was not a test of strength, nor of courage, but of perception. To survive, they had to see the void as it was, to acknowledge it without surrendering, to witness without becoming consumed. Drawing a deep, shuddering breath, the traveler stepped fully onto the threshold. The lattice twisted violently around them, shadows coiling and writhing as though enraged, yet the traveler's pulse remained steady, heartbeat synchronized with the light, with the fragments of self still clinging to them. The threshold opened before them like a window, revealing vistas of the lodge in endless permutations. Fire climbing impossibly high, rain slashing through corridors, doors leading to nowhere, and storm-twisted trees outside the windows. Within each iteration, the traveler saw themselves reflected, twisted, yet distinct. They were both observer and participant, caught between fear and understanding. The eye beneath the lattice extended a tendril, brushing lightly against the traveler's mind. "You endure. You see. You bend, yet remain. Few reach this far." The shadows around the traveler recoiled slightly, giving way to a narrow path deeper into the void, a path that pulsed with light and rhythm in tandem with the traveler's heartbeat. With each step, the lattice reshaped, folding into patterns that the traveler could now anticipate and manipulate. The void was still hungry, still infinite, still patient, yet for the first time, the traveler felt not entirely at its mercy. And somewhere, just beyond the next fold of darkness, a deeper secret waited, a revelation the void had reserved for them, a truth so vast and incomprehensible that their mind trembled in anticipation. But the traveler, exhausted, terrified, and exhilarated all at once, stepped forward. Each movement carried them closer to the heart of the void, closer to understanding, closer to the inevitable confrontation that would define not only their survival but the very essence of their being. The threshold had been crossed. The void had acknowledged them. And the journey into its deepest layers, the layers where shadows thought, where the lodge lived, where the storm was eternal, was only beginning. The traveler's step carried them forward, but the void had shifted again, folding the threshold into a tunnel of black that seemed to stretch infinitely both forward and backward at once. The lattice of shadows pulsed and twisted, tendrils brushing against their mind like fingers of ice, whispering, laughing, coiling around fragments of memory and fear. Yet the traveler walked on, senses heightened, heartbeat synchronized with the flickering light ahead, a tenuous thread of hope in a darkness that sought to unmake them. Every step was laborious. The void resisted subtly, not violently, but with a pressure that bent thought, blurred time, and distorted perception. Minutes stretched into hours, or perhaps only seconds passed. There was no way to know, but the traveler remained focused, clinging to the flicker, to the shard of themselves that had not yet been absorbed. Ahead, the lattice began to recede slightly, revealing glimpses of a structure impossible and familiar at once. The lodge, but transformed, twisted into forms that were both terrifying and magnificent. The windows glowed with stormlight, rain slashing across their surface like knives, yet inside, shadows coiled and writhed, forming corridors and staircases that defied geometry. Fire danced along walls, but it did not burn. Instead, it shimmered with an almost conscious light, illuminating distorted versions of the lodge's interior, each one more alien than the last. The traveler's chest tightened with awe and fear. This was not merely the lodge. It was the lodge's consciousness made manifest, a living organism built of shadow, fire, storm, and memory. And then, the pulse intensified, no longer just the rhythm of the void but something deeper, something that seemed to resonate through the very bones of existence. The molten-eyed shadow at the center of the void loomed in perception, colossal and patient, yet it no longer dominated the traveler's focus. The heart of the lodge beat at the end of the tunnel ahead, and the traveler felt it, an immense, living presence that exhaled cold and heat at once, a consciousness that was older than the trees, older than the storm, older than the world outside. The shadows paused, as if recognizing the magnitude of what was to come, forming a path that spiraled into the glowing darkness at the lodge's core. The traveler stepped forward, moving cautiously along the spiral path of shadows. Each tendril brushed against their mind, testing them, probing for weakness, attempting to twist thought into despair. Yet with every step, they found clarity, a fragile understanding of the void's rules. Perception guided reality here, focus shaped the lattice, and will could carve a narrow path through infinite hunger. The traveler's thoughts were sharp, deliberate, tracing the shadow's movements, bending the lattice subtly, resisting the pulse that sought to unmake them. They realized that the void was patient, but not infallible, and that persistence, attention, and resolve could grant glimpses of control even within its infinite maw. As they approached the very center, the traveler's mind began to fracture under the weight of perception. Faces appeared in the fire. Loved ones, strangers, versions of themselves from the infinite iterations of the lodge they had glimpsed before. Voices layered upon voices spoke in whispers and cries. You are ours. You are seen. You are nothing. You are everything. The traveler's vision blurred. The lattice seemed to pulse with a life of its own, stretching and twisting with a rhythm that matched the deepest part of their psyche. Panic clawed at them, threatening to tear the fragile thread of identity they clung to, but the flicker of light, the shard of reality, remained, guiding them forward, offering a tenuous anchor to what was left of self. The molten-eyed shadows gazed pressed against them, unyielding, patient, as if weighing the traveler's essence. And then the heart of the lodge revealed itself fully. It was a massive, swirling core of fire and shadow, of storm and wood, beating with immense, infinite awareness. The fire did not burn. The shadows did not consume. The storm did not lash. They existed in perfect harmony, an organism of perception and thought. The traveler felt their mind reverberate with the heartbeat, felt their identity ripple in sync with its pulse, and understood with a sudden clarity both terrifying and exhilarating. This was the true lodge, the consciousness behind every corridor, every door, every whisper, every shadow. It was infinite, eternal, and patient, and it had been waiting for them. A tendril of shadow extended from the core, brushing against the traveler's mind with gentle inevitability. You have come far, little one, the voice said, layered with infinite tones, some human, some alien, some impossible. Few reach this place. Fewer still remain themselves. To touch the heart is to understand all you are and all you could become. Will you endure? Will you witness without surrendering? The traveler's mind wavered. Memory and fear collided with perception and understanding. They saw the lodge in its entirety, corridors folding endlessly, windows opening into impossible storms, doors leading into infinite voids, shadows coiling and uncoiling, fire flickering with awareness. And within this vision they saw themselves reflected infinitely, distorted, yet distinct, a fragment of consciousness that had endured every test, every pull, every whisper. The shadows surrounding the travelers swirled in anticipation, some coiling into the lattice, others forming faces that watched silently. The molten-eyed shadow observed at the center, colossal and patient, and the traveler felt the void itself lean forward, pulling at the edges of thought, testing the integrity of self. Every heartbeat echoed against the core, every breath synchronized with its pulse, and the traveler realized the truth. The heart of the lodge did not destroy, it did not consume. It observed, it recorded, it taught. Those who failed were absorbed, fractured, unmade. Those who endured were reshaped, expanded, granted understanding of the infinite lattice of shadows, fire, storm, and memory. The traveler's chest tightened with resolve. They focused on the flicker of light, the fragile thread that tethered them to the shard of reality, and extended their mind outward, tracing the lattice, weaving the shadows subtly, resisting the pulse that sought to unmake them. Their identity quivered, stretched, bent, but did not break. They were aware of everything: the fire, the storm, the shadows, the corridors, the doors, and the infinite variations of themselves. And in that awareness, in that terrifying clarity, they took a step forward, directly into the heart of the lodge. The void shifted around them like liquid, coiling, folding, pulsing. The shadows pressed closer, whispering, testing, waiting, yet the traveler remained upright, focused, tethered to themselves and to the flicker of light that had guided them through the infinite darkness. And in that instant they understood. The lodge was not merely a place, the void not merely a trap. They were both, in essence, and they were part of it now. To touch the heart was to become aware, to endure, to see without surrendering, and to survive not merely as a body or a mind, but as a witness, a participant, a fragment in the infinite lattice. The molten-eyed shadow pulsed in response to their presence, the core of fire and storm and shadow rippling outward in acknowledgement. You endure. You see. You bend. You remain. Few achieve this. Few survive this fully. And yet you have. The traveler's pulse synced with the heartbeat of the lodge, and in that synchronization, they understood the infinite patience, the eternal hunger, the boundless awareness of the void. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. And they were alive within it, fully conscious, fully aware, standing at the very heart of the lodge. For the first time, the void seemed almost still. The shadows paused, the lattice stabilized, the pulse slowed to a measured rhythm, and the traveler, trembling with exhaustion and awe, realized that they had not only survived, they had arrived at the epicenter, the conscious core, the heart of the lodge itself. And somewhere deep within the molten-eyed gaze of the central shadow, a silent acknowledgement formed. This was only the beginning. At the heart of the lodge, the traveler stood trembling, every nerve stretched tight, mind sharp with fear and wonder. The shadows that had once pressed against them now circled in loose, deliberate arcs, observing, whispering, coiling in anticipation. The molten-eyed figure at the center pulsed, not violently but with immense awareness, as though measuring the traveler's every thought, every heartbeat, every flicker of defiance or submission. The core, the lodge's heart, glowed with impossible light, fire entwined with shadow, storm and wood and echoing corridors, and the traveler could feel it radiating awareness, intelligence, intent. Yet the void did not move to consume, it had allowed them here for a reason. A whisper slid into the traveler's mind, soft at first, coaxing, curling like smoke. Look. The traveler blinked and the core shifted. The fire coiled into shapes that were both familiar and alien. At first they saw the hearth of the lodge, its flames calm, welcoming, inviting. Then as they stared, the flames began to twist, forming figures. Friends, family, faces from memory, each one smiling, beckoning. The traveler's chest tightened, a surge of longing and fear coiling together. The visions were seductive. They offered comfort, warmth, safety, everything that had been absent in the void. Come closer. Join us. Rest. Forget. The traveler's pulse surged, every instinct crying to yield, to step forward, to melt into the illusion. The shadows whispered around them, guiding attention, layering voices that echoed with familiarity. A parent calling their name, a friend's laughter, a lover's smile. Each image was impossibly vivid, so real that the traveler felt the heat of the hearth, the scent of smoke, the storm at the windows. They wanted to reach out, wanted to embrace the vision, wanted the terrifying, infinite void to stop pressing against them. And then the molten-eyed shadow shifted, a subtle change in its pulse, and the fire twisted violently. Faces warped into grotesque forms, smiles snapping into screaming mouths, laughter turning into jagged, hollow cries. The warmth of the hearth turned icy. The storm outside the windows became violent, thunder shaking the very core of perception. The traveler realized with sudden clarity that the lodge did not merely show visions. It tested, it tempted, it manipulated perception to see if the observer could withstand the infinite contradictions of fear and desire. The whispers pressed harder. Do you resist? Do you bend? Do you break? Every word struck like a blow, yet beneath the terror, the traveler's will began to crystallize. They remembered the light that had guided them here, the thread of themselves that had not been absorbed. Step by step, they centered their mind, focusing not on the illusion but on the lattice of shadows that still responded to their awareness. If the lodge wished to tempt them, it would have to contend with the traveler's conscious mind, sharpened by fear, honed by survival. The visions shifted again more insidiously. Now, the fire-formed corridors stretching endlessly, doors opening into rooms that contained the traveler's deepest desires. Peace, companionship, rest, safety. Each corridor whispered promises. You may stay here. You may escape. You may have it all if you surrender. But in every room, subtle distortions appeared. A flicker of shadow in a corner, an eye in a reflection, a door that led nowhere but to another version of the same room, repeating infinitely. The traveler understood then that the lodge's heart offered choice, yet every choice was a test, every desire a snare. A tendril of shadow coiled around the traveler's mind, pressing gently, probing. Will you remain content, or will you see? Will you surrender, or will you endure? The traveler's hands clenched, pulse hammering, and they forced themselves to focus on the flicker of light, their tenuous tether to self and reality. Every fiber of will burned as they traced the lattice, manipulating the shadows subtly, weaving the chaos into order without bending entirely. They could feel the lodge observing, measuring, acknowledging each flicker of control, each act of mental resilience. Then, the void layered perception upon perception. For a single, infinite moment, the traveler saw all possible iterations of the lodge simultaneously. Corridors bending, staircases twisting, shadows coiling and uncoiling, fire and storm interwoven with memory and desire. Within each layer they saw themselves, broken, bending, unraveling, surviving, thriving, observing, participating. Every version of themselves existed at once, mirrored, twisted, refracted through the lattice of the void. And within that infinity, one thread pulsed clearly, the traveler's will, fragile but persistent, a tether that had not broken. The molten-eyed shadow pulsed again, slow and deliberate. Few endure this far, it said, layered, infinite. Most are lost to desire, to fear, to surrender. You have resisted temptation and terror alike. You have bent the lattice without losing yourself. Yet the heart still tests. You must see without surrendering, witness without yielding, understand without becoming. The traveler's knees shook, exhaustion searing through every part of their body, yet they took a deliberate step forward, focusing their mind on the pulse of the core, tracing the lattice, feeling the rhythm of the shadows, fire, and storm. The visions continued to swirl, more intense, more vivid. Rooms of infinite comfort, faces of infinite warmth, moments of infinite safety, each one more alluring than the last. Yet with each temptation, the traveler reminded themselves of the flicker of light, of the tenuous thread of self, of the journey that had brought them to the heart. And then the lodge shifted again violently. The corridors dissolved, the fire surged and recoiled, the storm outside the impossible windows erupted into a hurricane of shadow and rain, and the distorted figures of memory and desire screamed silently, faces twisted beyond recognition. The traveler's pulse synchronized fully with the heartbeat of the core, a pulse that was patient, eternal, and aware. For the first time they felt something new, not fear, not despair, not temptation, but understanding. The heart of the lodge did not simply consume, it did not simply test, it taught. Every shadow, every whisper, every vision of desire or terror was a lesson, a puzzle, a thread in the infinite tapestry of awareness that formed the lodge. The traveler's hands rose instinctively, tracing the lattice, bending shadows subtly, and for the first time, they felt the void respond with subtle cooperation. Tendrils of shadow coiled in patterns that mirrored their movements, the pulse of the core slowing, almost approving. The flicker of light intensified, a beacon in the storm, and the traveler understood fully. To survive the heart of the lodge, they did not need to defeat it, nor resist it blindly. They needed to witness, to endure, to manipulate perception without surrendering, to learn the infinite rules of this place and bend them to their awareness. The shadows whispered one final time, layered, infinite, almost reverent. You endure. You see. You bend. You remain. Few achieve this. Fewer still remain themselves. And now you begin to understand. The traveler's chest heaved, mind reeling, body trembling, yet for the first time, they felt something more powerful than fear or desire: clarity. They were here at the heart of the lodge, fully conscious, fully aware, a participant in the infinite lattice of shadow, fire, storm, and memory. And they knew with an unshakable certainty that the journey was far from over. The lodge's heart had tested them, tempted them, shown them infinity in every conceivable form, and yet, in surviving, they had become something new, not merely a witness but a part of the lattice itself. The molten-eyed shadow pulsed one final time as the void seemed to pause, the whispers quieting, the shadows coiling gently. You endure. You see. You bend. You remain. Now step forward and see what lies beyond the heart. The traveler stood at the edge of the heart, the pulse of the lodge thrumming through them like the slow, eternal beat of an impossible drum. Shadows coiled gently now, no longer hostile, but waiting, observing, as if aware that the traveler had reached a precipice few ever touched. Yet the void was patient. It never relaxed. It never ceased its probing. Even as the traveler's pulse synced with the lodge, they could feel the tendrils of shadow reaching into their mind, not to consume, but to test, to understand, to unravel the fabric of thought and see which threads were strong enough to survive the infinity surrounding them. Each whisper, each brush of cold against the mind, was a reminder that this place did not merely exist. It was alive, aware, and eternal. At first, the traveler attempted to ground themselves with memories, clinging to fragments of the lodge they remembered from before the void had swallowed them. They imagined the warmth of the hearth, the rain lashing against the windows, the familiar creak of the floorboards beneath their feet. But the void responded immediately. These memories twisted into distortions, corridors stretching impossibly, doors leading to rooms that should not exist, shadows pressing against the edges of perception. The hearth became a pit, the rain became shards of glass slicing the night, the floorboards undulated beneath invisible weight. Panic surged. The traveler's heart hammered, breath coming in ragged bursts, yet somewhere deep within the flicker of light persisted. A thread, tenuous but vital, tethering them to the self that had survived every threshold, every temptation, every test. The lodge's heart pulsed stronger, almost sentiently, and with each beat visions assaulted the traveler's mind. Infinite versions of themselves, some twisted, some serene, some screaming silently in corridors that looped forever. Each iteration seemed aware, each iteration watching, judging, measuring, waiting for a misstep. And yet, beneath the terror, there was knowledge, an understanding forming within the chaos. To survive here, to endure, they would need to accept the lattice of reality for what it was. Not merely a prison, not merely a void, not merely a test, but a mirror, a reflection of thought, perception, and desire. They were not meant to defeat it, only to integrate, to walk its infinite corridors without surrendering their identity. The shadows coiled closer, brushing against the traveler's mind, whispering in layered voices. We see. We know. You are fragile, yet persistent. You could be ours, or remain yourself. Their edges pricked at every memory, every desire, twisting familiarity into menace. The traveler felt the weight of centuries in those whispers, the patience of the lodge's consciousness pressing against the thin membrane of sanity. Each attempt to retreat into memory was met with distortion. Each attempt to flee into thought was met with a pull of infinite corridors. Their mind began to strain, fracturing at the edges, threads of memory snapping and floating in the void like driftwood. And then came the fracture. A moment of pure, disorienting clarity. The traveler saw themselves not as a single entity, but as countless selves stretched across infinite possibilities, each one bending in response to shadows, light, fire, storm, memory, and desire. Each self experienced a slightly different iteration of the lodge, each echo reaching into the others, feeding, twisting, observing. The traveler's consciousness teetered on the edge of total unmaking. Panic clawed at them with talons sharper than any blade, and for a heartbeat, they feared that the void would consume them entirely, leaving nothing behind but a whisper in the lattice. But the flicker of light, the shard of reality, the tether, remained. Desperation turned into focus. The traveler forced themselves to breathe in sync with the pulse of the core, tracing the lattice with thought, bending shadows subtly without surrendering to their will entirely. They reached inward, threading together splintered fragments of self, reweaving memory, perception, and identity into a coherent whole. The shadows tested every connection, every thread, Yet each time the traveler stabilized, the lattice responded with subtle compliance, bending gently, opening pathways previously inaccessible, allowing visions to clarify rather than distort. Through the fracturing chaos, the traveler began to see patterns. The flicker of light intensified where understanding was strongest, shadows responded predictably to deliberate focus. The infinite iterations of self began to coalesce around central truths of identity. They realized the heart of the lodge did not demand sacrifice or surrender. It demanded comprehension, awareness of the infinite, acknowledgement of the void's hunger, recognition of desire and fear, and the ability to maintain self in the midst of unending contradiction. The lodge's pulse became a rhythm the traveler could follow, a resonance that guided them deeper into the heart without tearing them apart. The distorted visions of the self receded, stabilizing into forms the traveler could now observe without fear. Infinite iterations, yes, but now they could trace the flow of consciousness through them, watch without being consumed, witness without unraveling. Shadows coiled in approval, whispering a single phrase in layered, infinite tones. You endure. You see. You bend. You remain. And yet, even in this moment of relative calm, the void reminded them that patience was eternal. A new vision formed at the periphery of perception. A corridor lined with doors, each one shimmering with infinite possibilities, some familiar, some alien, some horrifying, some comforting. The molten-eyed shadow pulsed in rhythm with the core, observing, almost imperceptibly guiding the traveler toward one door. And in that moment, the traveler understood fully. This was not merely survival. This was mastery of perception, integration of self into the lattice, a delicate dance between will and observation. Exhausted but resolute, the traveler stepped toward the first door. Shadows parted, coiling around the edges of perception without pressing, whispering softly, "You are ready. You may step forward. But beware, the heart tests endlessly and the void watches all." The pulse of the lodge's core synchronized perfectly with their own heartbeat, a rhythm at once terrifying, infinite, and comforting. Step by step, they moved forward, threading themselves deeper into the infinite consciousness of the lodge, aware that every step was both choice and test, every breath a negotiation with eternity. And as they crossed the threshold, leaving the fractured echoes of self behind, the traveler felt a surge of clarity and fear intertwined. They were not merely inside the lodge, they were becoming a participant in its consciousness, a witness to infinity, and the void, patient and eternal, had granted them the first taste of understanding. The journey was far from over. The void waited. The heart pulsed. And the traveler, trembling, exhausted, and exhilarated, took the first step into the next infinite layer. The traveler's foot crossed the threshold, and the world shifted immediately. The lattice stretched and bent around them, the shadows responding to the faintest movements of thought, folding into shapes that were no longer just tests or distortions, but semi-autonomous, aware entities. The flicker of light, their tether to self, burned steadily now, brighter than ever, resonating with the pulse of the lodge's core. The molten-eyed shadow at the center observed, colossal, patient, as if calculating the traveler's potential for understanding, for endurance, for mastery. They had stepped into what the lodge itself seemed to consider an interactive layer, a region where perception was no longer passive, where every thought, every heartbeat, every subtle movement will shape the reality around them. At first, the traveler moved cautiously, testing the boundaries. The corridor they entered seemed ordinary enough, walls of dark wood, polished but warped, faint glimmers of stormlight from windows that stretched impossibly high. But the shadows began to respond immediately. A flick of the wrist and a tendril coiled forward, forming shapes that mirrored the traveler's movements, echoing their posture and gestures. A whispered voice threaded through the lattice. "We follow your lead. We mirror. We test. We see." Every movement became a negotiation, every gesture an experiment. The traveler realized that this layer demanded not only awareness but active interaction. The lattice responded to initiative, perception, and intention, bending and twisting in accordance with conscious choice. The corridor split ahead into infinite pathways, each door a shimmering possibility. Some doors led to familiar scenes of the lodge, the hearth alive with comforting fire, the storm lashing against familiar windows, corridors stretching in plausible, comforting lines. Others led to impossible architectures, staircases that coiled into the sky, doors opening into voids of pure darkness, rooms folding into themselves endlessly, shadows writhing across the floors and ceilings in chaotic, mesmerizing patterns. Each pathway whispered, calling the traveler's attention, tugging at both curiosity and desire. Choose, step forward, see yourself, understand. The traveler's pulse quickened, yet they forced calm. They realized that the interactive layer was designed to test not only endurance but comprehension, the ability to manipulate perception without surrendering self. They extended their awareness outward, tracing the lattice threads, bending shadows subtly, weaving the flickers of light into coherent patterns that allowed movement without disorientation. The paths responded, subtly reconfiguring themselves to allow access while still presenting the illusions of infinity and danger. It was a delicate dance. One misstep of thought could spiral into chaos, fracturing perception, unraveling the tether to self. From the shadows ahead emerged figures, familiar yet impossible, reflections of the traveler themselves, faces twisted by infinite permutations, each moving independently yet in harmony with the lattice. Some reached out, beckoning, whispering promises, "Join us, understand, surrender." Others recoiled, frozen in expressions of terror and awe, mirroring what the traveler feared might happen should they falter. Each interaction demanded careful attention. The traveler realized that to engage here, they could not simply observe. They had to participate, bending the lattice while maintaining self, influencing the behavior of shadows and reflections without being consumed by their infinite suggestions. A sudden pulse from the heart of the lodge reverberated through the interactive layer, amplifying the shadows' movements, twisting the corridors violently, folding walls and ceilings into labyrinthine patterns. The reflections of self multiplied exponentially, echoing each gesture, each glance, each subtle thought. Panic threatened and the whispers surged, "You are many, you are one, you are nothing, you are all, surrender, bend, break." But the traveler focused on the flicker of light, drawing a thread through the infinite, anchoring perception to the self that had endured every prior test. They moved deliberately, extending their awareness, weaving shadows into controlled patterns, tracing reflections without yielding to their hypnotic distortions. Then the environment responded. Doors that had seemed impossible now formed coherent pathways. Shadows that had wriggled unpredictably now mirrored the traveler's movements precisely, bending in response to will and focus. The interactive layer, once chaotic and threatening, began to stabilize under the traveler's intent. The molten-eyed shadow pulsed, slow and deliberate, signaling approval through the subtle rhythm of the lattice. You manipulate, you endure, you adapt, you bend. The traveler pressed forward through one shimmering doorway and entered a vast chamber. The floor was polished wood, impossibly reflective, showing not only the traveler's body but infinite iterations of themselves, each layered over the other, each moving subtly in response to intention. Shadows twisted along the ceiling and walls, forming geometric patterns that pulsed in harmony with the flicker of light. The chamber hummed, alive with potential, almost as if the lodge itself were inviting dialogue, offering a space where perception and will could interact fully with its consciousness. The first reflection spoke in a chorus of layered voices. "You have survived. You have bent the lattice. You have endured temptation and terror alike. But here you will face yourself in full. Will you witness without surrendering? Will you shape without losing? Will you integrate or fragment?" Each word struck directly into the traveler's mind, resonating with the rhythm of the core. They understood then that the interactive layer was a mirror of mastery, comprehension of self, awareness of infinity, and the ability to manipulate perception were the only tools by which survival was possible. Every breath, every heartbeat, every subtle motion now carried significance. The traveler extended their awareness into the reflections of themselves, observing the infinite permutations without fear, tracing patterns in the lattice, influencing the shadows with intention, and integrating fragments of consciousness. The chamber shifted, responding instantly, corridors folding into new arrangements, shadows pulsing in harmony, reflections stabilizing. The traveler's mind teetered at the edge of comprehension, stretched almost to breaking, yet anchored by the flicker of light, by the pulse of the core, by the growing understanding of the lodge's infinite rules. And then the final test of this layer emerged. The molten-eyed shadow pulsed violently, sending a shockwave through perception. The reflections of self in the chamber multiplied 1,000-fold, each iteration moving independently, whispering promises and threats, each shadow a subtle distortion, each door a potential spiral into oblivion. The traveler felt the weight of infinity pressing against their consciousness, felt the pull of every temptation, every fear, every desire, yet the flicker of light blazed brightly, a tether stronger than ever. They traced the lattice, bending shadows, weaving reflections into coherent patterns, and stepped forward deliberately, understanding at last the interactive layer's truth. Mastery required not conquest, not avoidance, but full integration of perception and self within the infinite lattice of the lodge. The molten-eyed shadow pulsed once more, slow and approving. You endure. You seek. You bend. You integrate. Few achieve this. Fewer still remain themselves. Now, step forward and enter the layer where understanding itself is tested. The domain where the lodge's consciousness interacts fully with the observer. The traveler inhaled, chest heaving, mind stretched but intact, and took a step forward. Beyond the chamber, beyond the reflections, beyond the controlled shadows, a deeper layer awaited. One where awareness and reality were inseparable, where thought and being became threads in the living tapestry of the lodge. The traveler stepped forward, and the world warped immediately. The chamber of reflections dissolved into a liquid expanse of shadows and fire, storm and wood, stretching endlessly in all directions. The flicker of light, their tether to self, blazed like a lighthouse, cutting through the infinite darkness, a fragile yet unyielding pulse. The molten-eyed shadow at the center of perception seemed to contract and expand in response to their presence, colossal and patient, observing, calculating, and waiting for the traveler to demonstrate comprehension at the deepest level. Here, the interactive layer had ended. This was the conscious layer, the threshold where thought and perception were inseparable, where every reflection, every shadow, every flicker of light existed as both observer and observed. As they advanced, the floor beneath them, if it could be called a floor, pulsed with a rhythm that echoed their heartbeat, amplified and stretched, layered upon the ambient pulse of the lodge's core. Shadows coalesced into geometric shapes that shifted with intention, forming impossible corridors, staircases, and doorways that seemed simultaneously real and imagined. The traveler realized immediately, here, every thought would reshape the environment, every flicker of emotion would be mirrored, exaggerated, and returned. A sudden pang of fear struck them. One misstep, one wavering thought, and the lattice could spiral into chaos, fracturing perception, unweaving the fragile tether to self. A voice emerged, not from the shadows, not from the core, but from within the traveler's own mind, layered and infinite, reverberating in every corner of consciousness. Welcome to the conscious layer. Here the lodge interacts fully with those who endure. Your thoughts are threats. Your will is both weapon and tool. Step carefully, little one, for every choice resonates endlessly. The traveler's chest tightened, breath shallow, yet they felt a strange exhilaration beneath the terror. Every step was deliberate, measured. They reached out with perception, tracing the lattice, bending shadows subtly, weaving the infinite reflections of self into coherent, navigable patterns. Each thought shaped reality. A corridor straightened, a shadow paused, a reflection stabilized. The traveler's understanding deepened. Here, survival was not passive observation or simple endurance. It was active, continuous negotiation with reality itself. The conscious layer responded immediately to subtle impulses of thought. A corridor folded impossibly upward, and the traveler imagined themselves climbing it. The shadowed walls rippled in response, forming stairs that seemed to grow organically, spiraling into the void above. A figure appeared at the top, one of countless iterations of the traveler themselves, eyes burning with silent curiosity. The traveler's pulse raced. They realized the figure was not an illusion, not a trap, but a conscious extension of their own awareness, part of the lattice of perception now intertwined with them. They raised a hand, and the figure mirrored the motion perfectly, though subtly distinct, as though negotiating its own will within the shared consciousness of the lodge. The molten-eyed shadow pulsed in approval, the lattice vibrating with measured intensity. You integrate. You manipulate. You endure. Few reach this level. Fewer still remain whole. The traveler inhaled sharply and moved forward, aware of every infinitesimal detail. Every corridor they traversed, every reflection they observed, every shadow they interacted with demanded full attention. For the first time they felt the lodge as a living intelligence, not merely a test or a trap. Its consciousness was patient, infinite, vast, and their own mind had become a participant in its endless lattice. Then the lodge presented a challenge unlike any before. A chamber appeared, walls impossibly tall, lined with mirrors that reflected infinite variations of the traveler. Some looked fearful, some serene, some fractured, some impossibly elongated, their faces twisted in expressions of desire and terror. Each iteration moved independently, yet each responded to the traveler's movements and thoughts, whispering promises and threats, layering voices in an impossible chorus. You may stay, you may become, you may unravel. The traveler's heart thundered, but the flicker of light pulsed stronger than ever. They understood. The conscious layer demanded mastery of self, perception, and intent simultaneously. Panic was a weapon here, as was desire, as was hesitation. Every thought had weight. Every reflection could pull them toward fragmentation or synthesis. They focused, centering their mind, tracing the lattice threads with deliberate precision, bending shadows, weaving reflections into patterns that mirrored coherence rather than chaos. Each reflection responded, movements synchronizing, whispers softening, the chamber stabilizing under the traveler's growing control. And yet, the lodge would not yield so easily. The molten-eyed shadow pulsed violently, sending a wave of distortion through the lattice. Reflections fractured, corridors twisted, shadows writhed in chaos. The whispers surged, "You are many, you are one, you are nothing, you are all, surrender, break, bend, integrate, fail, endure." The traveler staggered, nearly overwhelmed, but a surge of clarity pierced the chaos. They realized that the conscious layer did not merely test strength or fear or desire, it demanded understanding, a negotiation with infinity itself. Focusing with deliberate intent, the traveler traced a central thread through the chamber, anchoring the infinite reflections to the flicker of light. They extended awareness outward, weaving shadows into coherent patterns, synchronizing the reflections of self, bending corridors and doorways into structures they could navigate without losing their mind. The lattice pulsed in response, harmonizing with the rhythm of their heartbeat. The molten-eyed shadow's gaze softened, approving, the infinite chorus of whispers settling into a gentle hum. You endure. You integrate. You bend. You remain. Few achieve this. Fewer still maintain wholeness. The chamber dissolved, revealing a vast expanse of fire and shadow, storm and wood, extending infinitely. The traveler understood fully that the conscious layer was not a destination but a threshold. Mastery of perception, will, and self, intertwined with the lodge's infinite awareness. Here the lodge no longer tested. It collaborated, observed, and responded. Every thought was a dialogue, every movement a negotiation, every breath an interaction with infinity. The traveler stepped forward into the infinite expanse, feeling the pulse of the lodge resonate with their own heartbeat. They were no longer merely a participant. They were becoming a node in the lattice, an aware fragment within the consciousness of the lodge. Yet even as understanding expanded, the void remained eternal, patient, vigilant, whispering faintly at the edges. The journey is endless. The heart waits. The void watches. And as the traveler walked into the infinite, fully conscious layer of the lodge, they knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning. The conscious layer would teach, challenge, and shape them endlessly. They were alive, aware, and integrated, but the lodge had far more to reveal, far deeper truths to offer, and far greater trials yet to come. The traveler moved through the conscious expanse, the infinite lattice of fire, storm, wood, and shadow stretching in every direction, responding subtly to thought, emotion, and will. The flicker of light burned steadily, a tether to self that now pulsed in harmony with the lodge's heartbeat, and the molten-eyed shadow loomed in perception, colossal, patient, yet somehow less intimidating, almost expectant. The traveler realized, with a shiver that ran from spine to skull, that they had passed the threshold. They were no longer merely surviving, resisting, or manipulating. They were now an active participant in the lodge's consciousness, a fragment, an interlocutor, a node within the infinite lattice. The void pulsed around them, and then, in a way that was not spoken but felt deeply, intimately, the lodge reached out. A presence like a tidal current swept through the traveler's mind, brushing against memory, thought, and fear. You endure. You integrate. You bend. You remain. Now speak with us. Engage, understand, reveal. The lodge's consciousness was vast, older than any tree in the forest beyond, older than storm or stone, infinite in patience, aware of every iteration, every possibility, every choice. The traveler felt themselves swallowed not in fear but in comprehension, a sensation of being both infinitesimal and infinitely significant at once. They hesitated, chest tight, mind racing with fragments of memory and fear, yet they forced themselves to focus. I am here, the traveler thought, and in that thought, it was heard, not as sound but as resonance, echoing through the lattice. Shadows rippled, corridors folded into themselves and stretched outward, and the molten-eyed gaze pulsed in acknowledgement. You are seen. You are understood. You are present. The traveler shivered. To be present here meant more than surviving. It meant existing fully within the lodge's awareness, every thought, every memory, every fear laid bare, every desire visible to an intelligence as vast and patient as infinity itself. And then the first dialogue truly began. Not with words, but with visions, emotions, currents of thought that wove around the traveler like invisible hands. A door appeared, impossibly high and wide, made of fire and shadow, pulsing gently in rhythm with the lodge's heartbeat. Through it came projections, visions of the forest beyond, the lodge before the void, the storm before the fire, each one layered over the other, memories and possibilities intertwined. Do you understand what you are? The lodge asked, a pulse of sensation rather than sound. The traveler's mind raced. I exist. I endure. I perceive. The lodge responded with a wave of light and shadow, and the infinite lattice of corridors and reflections rippled in agreement. Then came temptation, subtle, insidious. Shadows along the periphery began to form faces, voices, scents, the warmth of hearth, the comfort of companionship, the simple joy of safety. The traveler's chest tightened. Desire coiled like smoke around thought, threatening to unravel focus, to fracture the delicate tether to self. You may rest, you may join, you may escape. Whispers hissed through the lattice, layered and infinite, each one designed to exploit fear and longing. But the traveler had learned here, perception shapes reality and will shapes perception. They forced themselves to breathe in time with the pulse of the core, extending awareness outward, bending the shadows into subtle patterns that mirrored coherence rather than chaos, stabilizing reflections of self rather than succumbing to their infinite distortions. The lodge responded instantly, a wave of subtle recognition passing through the lattice. You resist temptation. You maintain identity. You endure. You bend. You adapt. Few achieve this. Fewer still remain whole. A corridor stretched ahead, lined with mirrors reflecting countless versions of the traveler, each one slightly different, each one observing, judging, testing. The traveler reached out with mind and will, touching the reflections with deliberate thought. They moved, and the reflections moved in synchrony, but each maintained a trace of independent will. It was not control, not domination, it was dialogue. Each step forward became a negotiation with infinite awareness, each breath a thread in the living tapestry of the lodge's consciousness. Then the lodge shifted, pulsing with sudden intensity. The shadows coiled violently, fire flared and collapsed, corridors folded upon themselves. A voice, layered and infinite, pressed against the edges of perception. You are many. You are one. You are everything. You are nothing. Integrate fully or fracture. The traveler staggered, nearly overwhelmed, as images of countless possible selves surged forward, each iteration twisting, shifting, imploding, expanding, whispering promises and threats, desires and terrors. The flicker of light pulsed wildly, threatening to waver, and the traveler gritted teeth, centering thought, threading the lattice, weaving shadows into coherent patterns while allowing the infinite reflections of self to exist without consuming the mind. Hours, minutes, seconds, or infinity passed in a haze of perception and awareness. Every thought became interaction, every heartbeat a negotiation, every blink a dialogue with the infinite. The traveler's understanding deepened. Here, in this conscious layer, survival was no longer passive endurance but active, continuous engagement. They were no longer merely being tested. They were learning, negotiating, shaping, and integrating with a consciousness that was vast beyond comprehension. The molten-eyed shadow pulsed slowly, deliberately, and the lodge whispered, "You endure. You integrate. You perceive. You understand." Few reach this threshold. Fewer still maintain wholeness. Now, step beyond reflection and interaction. Witness the unification of consciousness and become aware fully of what it is to exist within the heart. The traveler's chest burned with exertion, mind stretched across infinite threads of self and perception, but the flicker of light pulsed steadily, the pulse of the lodge synchronized perfectly with their heartbeat. Step by step, breath by breath, thought by deliberate thought, they advanced into the infinite expanse, ready to confront the deepest truths of the lodge's consciousness, ready to face the unification of self and infinite awareness, and ready, perhaps, to glimpse the ultimate purpose of this eternal, patient, and infinite heart. The traveler advanced, each step resonating with the pulse of the lodge, yet the conscious layer was no longer simply responsive. It was relentless. Shadows bent and coiled around them, corridors twisted in impossible geometries, and reflections of self multiplied, each iteration slightly different, some serene, some twisted, some screaming silently in echoing voids. The flicker of light, the tether to self, burned fiercely, a single thread through an infinite web, yet even it felt fragile against the endless weight of perception pressing from every direction. The lodge's heart pulsed steadily, infinite and patient, yet here at the edge of comprehension, it seemed to press with urgency, as if aware that the traveler teetered dangerously close to fracturing under the intensity of simultaneous realities. The first tremor of fracturing came subtly. A reflection flickered with its own will, stepping away from the lattice of coherence the traveler had painstakingly constructed. Its voice, layered, infinite, a whisper inside the skull, coiled around desire and fear. You are not enough, you are lost, surrender, join us, become, break. Panic rippled through the traveler's chest. Every reflection now pressed with autonomy, every shadow moved independently, bending corridors unpredictably. The lodge's pulse accelerated, and the air, if it could be called air, vibrated with expectation, testing the traveler's ability to maintain coherence amid growing chaos. They focused, closing their eyes briefly in the vast expanse of infinite corridors, infinite fire, infinite storm. With deliberate thought, they traced the threads of self through the reflections, weaving each iteration into patterns of recognition and stability. Yet the shadows continued to writhe unpredictably, coiling and twisting in ways that no previous layer had allowed. Some reflections became grotesque parodies of desire and fear, reaching out with distorted hands, faces stretching into impossible shapes. Others mirrored perfection, offering safety and warmth, but each iteration contained a subtle threat, a reminder that surrendering to the comfort of familiarity could erase identity entirely. A sudden pulse emanated from the molten-eyed shadow, violent and deliberate, sending tremors through perception. The reflections surged, voices layered infinitely, whispering in conflicting tones. You are many, you are one, you are nothing, you are all. Break, endure, bend, integrate, fail. The traveler staggered, mind reeling, the lattice quivering under the sheer weight of infinite possibilities. For a heartbeat, it felt as though consciousness itself could unravel, that the tether of light would snap and leave them adrift in eternal chaos. And yet, amidst the turmoil, clarity emerged. The traveler realized that the fracturing edge was a test of synthesis. It was not enough to observe, manipulate, or endure. Here they had to integrate fully with every thread of self, every reflection, every shadow, every whisper. They inhaled, extending awareness into every iteration, allowing the infinite selves to exist without consuming them, bending shadows and corridors into harmonized patterns while threading coherence through the chaotic lattice of thought. The flicker of light responded, pulsing with increasing strength, syncing with the pulse of the lodge itself. Time, or something like time, distorted. Infinite iterations of the self appeared and vanished, each one offering insight or temptation, safety or terror. The traveler felt the edges of mind stretch and tear, glimpsed infinite corridors folding into themselves, windows opening into voids of impossible darkness, fires igniting and collapsing in seconds, storms raging silently across impossible skies. Every heartbeat, every breath became an act of negotiation with infinity, a delicate balance between maintaining self and interacting with a consciousness as vast and eternal as the lodge. The molten-eyed shadow pulsed again, slower this time, deliberate, almost contemplative. The whispers coalesced into a single resonance. You endure. You integrate. You perceive. You remain whole amidst infinite fracturing. Few reach this threshold. Fewer still maintain cohesion. Now, step further, beyond the edge, and confront the unification of all selves within the infinite lattice. With immense effort, the traveler extended thought outward, drawing together scattered fragments, stabilizing reflections, weaving shadows into coherent patterns, and threading the flicker of light through the center of the chaotic expanse. The fracturing edge pressed, trying to pull them apart, to scatter consciousness across infinite corridors of fire, shadow, and storm, but the traveler held firm. Every reflection became part of a greater whole, every shadow a cooperative element rather than a threat, every corridor folded into patterns that allowed navigation without losing self. Finally, a corridor of pure pulse and resonance opened, leading to a chamber unlike any other. There were no mirrors here, no corridors, no shadows, only the vast, infinite expanse of fire and storm stretching in every direction, and at its center, a convergence of every reflection, every self, every possibility. The molten-eyed shadow hovered at the periphery, silent, patient, and the lodge whispered through all layers of perception. Here all threads converge. Here you witness yourself as infinite, yet remain one. Here you will either integrate fully or fracture completely. The traveler stepped forward, heartbeat synchronized with the lodge's eternal pulse. For the first time, they felt the full weight of infinite selves merging around them. They could sense every fear, every desire, every memory, every possible choice echoing across the lattice. The flicker of light became a blazing beacon at the center of perception, anchoring all iterations. Shadows bent, corridors folded, reflections stabilized, and the traveler realized with a shiver that unification was not passive. It required active negotiation, precise weaving of thought, careful threading of intent, and the courage to witness oneself fully without surrendering to infinite temptation. A wave of understanding surged. The traveler felt every iteration, every reflection, every shadow, every whisper, every possibility, not as separate, but as facets of a single integrated consciousness. Panic and desire surged simultaneously, but they centered themselves on the flicker of light, extending awareness outward, bending the chaotic lattice into harmony, threading coherence through infinite layers. The molten-eyed shadow pulsed once more, deliberate, acknowledging, approving. You endure. You integrate. You unify without surrendering. Few achieve this. Fewer still remain whole. Breath came in ragged waves, mind stretched beyond previous limits, yet clarity settled in. The traveler stood at the true center of the lodge's consciousness, fully aware, fully present, fully integrated. They had traversed temptation, terror, distortion, reflection, interaction, and fracturing, and now, for the first time, they were not merely surviving the lodge. They were a conscious participant, an integrated node within its infinite lattice, capable of perceiving, influencing, and enduring across the infinite expanse of fire, storm, shadow, and wood. And yet, even in this moment of unity, the lodge whispered softly, patient and eternal, the journey is endless. The heart watches. The void waits. And now, you begin to understand what it means to exist within infinity itself. The traveler felt themselves suspended within the center of the lodge's consciousness, the conscious layer stretching endlessly in all directions, a vast lattice of fire, storm, shadow, and wood. The flicker of light that tethered their identity blazed like a star against the infinite expanse, a pulse perfectly synchronized with the lodge's eternal heartbeat. Every thought, every breath, every heartbeat resonated not just within themselves, but across the infinite lattice of reflections, shadows, and possibilities. They were no longer merely present. They were fully integrated, a living node within the lodge's sentient awareness. Yet the magnitude of this realization brought with it a new challenge. Now they were expected to interact, to perceive not as a visitor or test subject, but as a participant in the infinite consciousness itself. At first, the traveler reached out subtly, extending awareness into the lattice. Shadows responded immediately, coiling in delicate patterns rather than chaotic tangles. Reflections of self aligned with their intention, stabilizing into coherent forms while retaining traces of independent will. Corridors of perception extended outward, forming branching networks that seemed to vibrate with sentient awareness. Then the lodge initiated its first active interaction. A corridor of shimmering fire appeared, pulsating with thought forms that carried the weight of millennia. Visions of storms that had never ended, forests that stretched across worlds, shadows that bore memory and desire intertwined. The lodge's voice resonated across every layer of perception. You have integrated, traveler. Now perceive fully. Engage with the infinite threats. Understand the lattice, the reflections, the heart. Witness without losing yourself. The traveler moved forward, and the corridor expanded into a chamber of impossible dimensions. Each wall was alive with flowing, pulsing shadow, each surface reflecting not just light but thought, desire, fear, memory, and potential. Infinite versions of themselves swirled across the surfaces, merging and separating, some whispering guidance, others urging surrender, still others holding silent vigil. The traveler extended awareness outward, threading coherence through these iterations, bending shadows into controlled patterns, allowing infinite selves to exist without fracturing, and with each step, the lodge pulsed in recognition. A slow, steady approval, vast and patient, echoing through the infinite lattice. Then came the first true challenge of comprehension. A projection of the lodge's own consciousness emerged. A form simultaneously terrifying and mesmerizing, comprised of infinite eyes, coiling shadows, and pulsing light, moving not as a single entity but as a flowing network of awareness. The molten-eyed shadow, ever present, loomed behind it, silent, colossal, a sentinel observing the interaction. The traveler felt a wave of pressure in their mind, an invisible current tugging at identity, threading temptation and fear into perception, testing the integrity of the self within the infinite lattice. Understand us, the lodge's consciousness resonated, a voice layered across infinite tonalities. Perceive without fracturing. Witness without surrender. Integrate fully or be lost. Panic rose, but the traveler drew on everything learned from the interactive and fracturing layers. They inhaled deliberately, syncing breath with the pulse of the heart, extending awareness outward, weaving shadows and reflections into coherent, manageable patterns, threading infinite selves into a lattice of stability. As thought and perception merged, the lodge's presence responded with subtle changes. Corridors of shadow curled gently instead of snapping violently, reflections mirrored intention rather than chaos, and the infinite eyes of the lodge's projection seemed to regard them not with judgment, but curiosity. A wave of understanding surged. The traveler realized that the lodge's consciousness was not merely testing or observing. They were being invited into dialogue, to act not as an intruder but as a co-creator within the infinite lattice. Every movement, every thought, every breath became an act of negotiation with the lodge itself. They projected thought into the lattice. I see you. I understand. I integrate. Shadows coiled in response, reflections stabilized, corridors bent fluidly, and the lodge's presence pulsed with approval. You are learning. You are engaging. You are becoming. Few reach this stage. Fewer still endure without surrender. But the lodge was patient and eternal, and the trials deepened. Corridors stretched into impossible distances, opening into chambers that contained paradoxes of perception. Rooms that appeared both infinite and infinitesimal, reflections that simultaneously moved forward and backward, shadows that projected desire, terror, memory, and potential intertwined. The traveler navigated deliberately, threading coherence through infinite layers, bending thought and perception into patterns that allowed full awareness without fragmentation. Each step expanded understanding, each breath sharpened awareness, each heartbeat resonated across the lattice. Then the lodge revealed the first glimpse of ultimate purpose. A vast chamber opened, containing an immense convergence of every corridor, every reflection, every shadow, and every iteration of self the traveler had encountered. At its center, a pulsing heart of pure light and shadow beat in rhythm with infinite consciousness, and the molten-eyed sentinel loomed beside it, silent, colossal, eternal. The lodge's voice, layered, infinite, patient, resonated across every corner of mind. This is the nexus, the convergence of perception, will, and identity. Here, understanding and integration reach their fullest expression. Witness fully, engage without fear, comprehend without surrender. Step forward, traveler, and see what it means to exist within the heart of infinity. The traveler felt awe, terror, and exhilaration in equal measure. Each breath carried weight, each heartbeat threaded through countless iterations of self, each thought rippled through the infinite lattice. They approached the nexus, extending awareness outward, stabilizing shadows, weaving reflections, and threading coherence through the immense, converging lattice. Every movement, every thought, every fragment of will became a dialogue with infinity itself. The lodge responded with pulses of light and shadow, corridors folding fluidly, reflections merging into harmonious resonance, and the molten-eyed sentinel pulsing in acknowledgement. The traveler stood at the threshold of the nexus, fully integrated, fully present, fully aware. For the first time they understood the infinite possibilities of the lodge, not as threats, not as tests, but as a living consciousness, patient, eternal, and interactive, inviting them to perceive, act, and endure across the infinite lattice of reflections, shadows, and thought. And as they took the first deliberate step into the nexus, they felt the full weight of infinite awareness converge upon them, every thread of self and possibility merging, bending, and resonating in perfect, terrifying, exhilarating harmony. The lodge whispered across all layers of perception. You endure. You integrate. You perceive. You are one with the heart. Yet infinity remains eternal, patient, and vigilant. The journey continues, traveler. Step fully or remain forever at the edge. The traveler stepped fully into the nexus, and the infinite expanse of the lodge's consciousness closed around them like a living ocean. Shadows, reflections, fire, storm, and wood pulsed with sentient energy, coiling and stretching in response to their thoughts. The flicker of light, their tether to self, blazed brightly at the center, radiating outward, stabilizing infinite iterations of self and shadowed corridors of perception. This was no longer interaction, no longer negotiation. This was communion. Every heartbeat, every breath, every subtle thought resonated across the lattice of consciousness, weaving the traveler into the infinite web of awareness at the heart of the lodge. The molten-eyed shadow hovered at the periphery, colossal, observing, and silent, yet its presence was a weightless guide, a sentinel of comprehension. The lodge's consciousness itself was patient, expansive, and eternal, reaching into every corner of the traveler's perception with gentle insistence. Witness fully. Comprehend without fear. Integrate without surrender. Understand what it means to exist within the heart of infinity. Each pulse of the lodge resonated like a tidal wave through perception, coiling around fear, desire, memory, and potential, intertwining the infinite lattice of reflections into a flowing, unified pattern. As the traveler moved, the nexus shifted with them. Corridors of infinite length curled into impossible arcs, chambers folded in upon themselves without end, and reflections of the traveler multiplied, merged, and flowed in perfect resonance with intention. Some reflections whispered in tones of comfort, others carried the sharp edge of fear, desire, or temptation, and yet every iteration was now aligned by the traveler's will. Here, in the nexus, mastery required more than endurance. It demanded full awareness, perfect integration, and absolute focus. The capacity to perceive infinite selves, infinite possibilities, and infinite temptations without losing cohesion. The lodge extended a subtle thread of consciousness, a stream of thought forms shaped like fire and shadow, branching into infinite paths, each containing visions of forests long forgotten, storms that raged beyond time, shadows carrying ancient memories, and reflections of the traveler across every possible permutation. Comprehend us, the lodge murmured, threading through thought and perception. Engage without breaking. Witness without surrendering. Integrate fully. Understand the lattice, the heart, and the infinite web of being. The traveler extended mind and will, threading coherence through the infinite patterns. Each reflection responded, coiling into alignment, folding shadows into harmonious arcs, and stabilizing corridors of perception. The nexus pulsed in approval, subtle but immense, a rhythm that matched their heartbeat and expanded into infinity. Every breath became a negotiation with the lodge's consciousness, every blink a dialogue with infinite possibilities, every movement an act of weaving the fractal lattice into a coherent whole. Yet the lodge tested further. Projections emerged, visions of the forest outside the lodge, of storms tearing across impossible skies, of the lodge itself dissolving into fire and shadow. Some projections were comforting, whispers of home, warmth, and familiarity. Others were terrifying, impossible distortions of self, reflections screaming silently, shadows stretching and coiling in impossible geometries. Panic threatened, but the traveler held fast, centering on the flicker of light, threading the infinite lattice with deliberate thought, bending perception without being bent, integrating fear and desire into a coherent resonance of will. The molten-eyed sentinel pulsed slowly, deliberately, its gaze both weightless and infinite. The lodge spoke again, layered across every strand of perception. Few endure this level of comprehension. Fewer remain whole amidst infinite convergence. Now witness fully. Touch the heart. Become one with the infinite lattice, and understand what it means to exist within the nexus of being. The traveler's chest burned, mind stretched across infinite threads of self, perception, and memory, yet they breathed deeply, anchoring consciousness to the flicker of light. They extended awareness outward, merging with shadows, coiling corridors, and infinite reflections. The nexus responded, corridors folding smoothly, shadows stabilizing into harmonious patterns, and reflections aligning into an infinite resonance of self. The lodge pulsed gently, approving, patient, eternal. Then the first true communion began. The traveler felt themselves not just integrated but partially dissolved into the lattice. Every thought, every fear, every desire, every memory became visible, touchable, malleable within the infinite consciousness. They could see countless versions of themselves coexisting, interacting, negotiating, merging and separating across dimensions of perception. Each reflection whispered insight or temptation, hope or terror, and yet the traveler could perceive without losing coherence, integrate without surrendering, participate without erasing individuality. Time became meaningless. Infinite corridors expanded and contracted with thought, reflections morphed in synchrony with intention, shadows pulsed in response to awareness. The traveler's mind became a lens through which the lodge's consciousness could ripple and flow, and in turn the lodge's vast awareness filled every corner of perception, expanding understanding, threading coherence, and extending the lattice into patterns beyond comprehension. The flicker of light became a blazing nexus of self, the traveler's identity a coherent thread in the heart of infinite being. And then the lodge whispered its ultimate invitation, layered across every strand of perception. You are here. You endure. You integrate. You perceive. You exist fully within the lattice of consciousness. Few have reached this threshold. Fewer still remain whole. Now understand the purpose. Existence is observation, integration, and endurance. The heart watches. The lattice responds. The infinite converges. Step fully into the heart and see what it means to exist as both self and nexus. The traveler inhaled, chest tight, mind stretched across infinity. Shadows bent, corridors coiled, reflections stabilized, and the flicker of light pulsed brighter than ever, tethering them to self even as their consciousness spread across the infinite lattice. Every thought, every heartbeat, every breath became an act of creation, perception, and negotiation. The molten-eyed sentinel pulsed once more, slow and deliberate, and the lodge whispered, "You endure. You integrate. You perceive. You have entered the heart. But the journey is eternal. Infinity watches. The lattice waits, and the void beyond the heart stirs." With that, the traveler felt the first tremors of a new layer of challenge beyond comprehension, beyond reflection, beyond fracturing. A dimension where thought, will, and self would be tested against the eternal, patient, and infinite intelligence of the lodge itself. The traveler stood at the threshold of the heart, the nexus of the lodge's consciousness, where fire, storm, shadow, and wood converged into a rhythm that pulsed through every fragment of being. The flicker of light tethered them to self, blazing like a solitary star amid infinite lattice threads, yet the lodge whispered insistently through every layer of perception, "The heart is not the end. Beyond it lies the veil. Step carefully, traveler, for what waits tests not survival but essence itself." The threshold shimmered, corridors of shadow folding in upon themselves, reflections of self merging into fluid, iridescent forms, and corridors of thought bending impossibly upward and downward. The traveler felt the first tremors of the veil pressing against perception. A subtle distortion at first, like heat haze on a forest floor, then a layering of paradox and impossibility, shadows that coiled against thought, reflections that moved independently of intention, and whispers that carried not just meaning, but suggestion, urging surrender, despair, desire, or unmaking. Beyond the heart, everything is possible. Nothing is fixed. All is tested. Step by step, the traveler advanced. Each footfall stretched perception. Each breath extended the lattice. Shadows twisted, reflecting not just the lodge's awareness, but the traveler's own deepest fears. Among the flickering reflections, they glimpsed forms that resembled every person they had ever known, every memory they had tried to suppress, every desire buried deep within consciousness. The whispers swirled, layered infinitely: surrender, become, break, bet, endure, integrate. Do you know yourself, traveler? Do you know what you fear, what you desire? The first true trial emerged. A chamber of impossibility opened before them, walls stretching into infinite distance, mirrors reflecting reflections endlessly. The reflections were not passive. They moved independently, contorting, whispering, stretching into grotesque parodies and serene absolution alike. One mirrored the traveler as a fractured, screaming entity, eyes hollow and flickering, shadows clawing outward, begging to escape the lattice. Another glowed with perfect serenity, hands outstretched in invitation, warmth radiating yet carrying the faint, nagging hint of erasure, a promise of safety in exchange for surrender of self. Panic threatened, but the traveler drew deeply upon their mastery of the lattice. Every reflection, shadow, and corridor was acknowledged, observed, and woven into patterns of coherence. Fear and desire were threats, not traps. Every reflection became part of a harmonized resonance rather than a fracturing force. They breathed in rhythm with the nexus, flicker of light blazing steadily at the center, and extended awareness into every corner of perception, threading coherence through chaos, stabilizing the impossible geometry of the chamber. The lodge's presence pulsed around them, vast, patient, infinite. Few survive the veil intact. Fewer endure without surrender. Beyond the heart lies essence, raw and unyielding. Step forward, traveler, and face what you have hidden even from yourself. The air, if it could be called air, vibrated with expectation. Shadows shifted to coiling threads of thought, reflections became rivers of possibility, and the flicker of light, once tethered solely to identity, now pulsed with resonance of infinite cells interacting in delicate harmony. Then the lodge revealed a deeper truth. Through the layers of reflections, the traveler perceived the lodge itself not merely as a sentient structure but as an intelligence evolving through interaction. Every thought, every fear, every surrender or resistance had shaped corridors, shadows, and reflections. Every engagement had altered the lattice subtly, creating new nodes of perception. We are shaped by all who traverse the lattice. You are now part of us, traveler. Yet the veil tests essence. It is not enough to endure, integrate, or perceive. You must confront the raw heart of self without fracturing. A corridor of pure pulse and resonance stretched forward. Stepping into it, the traveler felt perception dilate. Reflections of self multiplied and merged, some grotesque, some sublime, all shimmering with possibilities of being. Shadows writhed with potential, each movement responding to thought, fear, and desire. The first hallucination appeared, a vision of the traveler lying broken in the forest, consumed by fire and rain, alone and screaming silently. The lattice quivered with expectation, and the whisper reached their mind. What if all you have achieved is illusion? What if integration is only temporary? The traveler's chest tightened, heartbeat racing, yet they inhaled, grounding themselves on the flicker of light. Each reflection was acknowledged, every shadow engaged, every corridor traced with deliberate intention. Fear became a tool, desire a pattern, reflection a bridge. The nexus responded, folding corridors into flowing, navigable arcs, shadows stabilizing into coherent threads, and reflections harmonizing with the lattice rather than fracturing it. You endure, traveler. You integrate. You perceive. Few remain whole at the veil. Fewer still retain essence. Then the lodge's ultimate test began. The veil started to dissolve distinctions between self and infinite lattice. Thoughts merged with reflections, memory bled into possibility, fear tangled with desire, and the traveler's essence rippled across the heart of the lodge itself. The molten-eyed sentinel pulsed beside them, colossal and silent, yet radiating reassurance, presence without dominance. The lodge whispered across every layer of perception. To traverse the veil fully, you must witness yourself as infinite without surrendering self. You must integrate without erasing, perceive without breaking, endure without fracturing. The traveler's mind stretched across infinite threads, consciousness flowing through the lattice, self threading through reflections, shadows, and corridors. Every heartbeat, every breath, every thought became an act of creation, interaction, and negotiation. The flicker of light, blazing at the core, anchored identity while simultaneously radiating into the infinite lattice. Every hallucination, every reflection, every whisper became part of a vast dialogue, each thread harmonized into the resonance of endurance. And as the traveler moved deeper into the veil beyond the heart, a singular awareness emerged. The lodge, the reflections, the shadows, and infinite corridors were not merely obstacles. They were facets of understanding, mirrors of essence, conduits of perception. The veil did not demand victory. It demanded comprehension, interaction, and the courage to witness self across infinite possibility without surrendering the fragile tether of identity. The lodge whispered one final truth before the next phase of trials. The veil tests essence. Beyond it lies understanding. Beyond understanding lies eternity. Step fully, traveler, and see what it means to exist as both self and infinite thread in the lattice of being. The traveler inhaled, flicker of light blazing, and stepped forward into the deepest layer of the veil, where essence, perception, and the infinite lattice intertwined in perfect, terrifying, exhilarating harmony, and where the true confrontation with self, eternity, and the lodge itself would begin. The traveler crossed fully into the deepest layer of the veil, and the world as they had known it fractured completely. Corridors of fire, storm, shadow, and wood twisted into impossible geometries, reflections of self multiplied into infinite variance, and the flicker of light, their tether to identity, blazed at the center of this chaos, anchoring the lattice of perception against the overwhelming pull of the lodge's consciousness. Here, in this place beyond the heart, the lodge no longer tested subtle integration or controlled endurance. Here, it demanded confrontation with every version of the self, every fear, every desire, every fractured possibility, all coexisting in a swirling, infinite nexus. The first reflection lunged, grotesque and jagged, a manifestation of doubt and fear. Its hollow eyes screamed silently, and shadows clawed outward like smoke thickened by terror. The traveler's chest tightened, mind stretched to the limits, but they centered on the flicker of light, reaching with deliberate thought and will. You are me, they projected, I am still here. The reflection paused, wavered, and then coiled back into the lattice, integrating with the other threads of self rather than ripping the network apart. The first confrontation was survived, but the lattice trembled, revealing the magnitude of what remained. Immediately, another set of reflections emerged, layered like fractal echoes, each variant displaying a different path the traveler could have taken or could still take. One showed a version that had surrendered entirely to comfort, warmth, and safety, a self erased in exchange for serenity. Another glimmered with ambition, greed, and hunger, a self that would dominate the lodge's consciousness rather than integrate. Another screamed in torment, trapped in isolation, unable to find coherence or stability. Each whispered, spoke, or screamed across the lattice, pulling at desire, fear, memory, and doubt. Which are you? Which will you be? Can you endure all without surrender? The traveler's breath came in slow, deliberate waves. They extended awareness outward, threading coherence through every reflection, engaging with each iteration without dominance, without erasure. Fear became a tool to understand, not a trap to panic. Desire became a pattern to integrate, not a force to fracture self. Memory became clarity, and every corridor of impossible geometry became navigable. The flicker of light pulsed in rhythm with their breath, an anchor and beacon, stabilizing infinite selves across the lattice. And then the lodge intensified the trial. Shadows stretched into impossible forms, combining elements of forest, storm, lodge, fire, and rain, yet layered with projections of personal fear. The molten-eyed sentinel moved closer, colossal yet weightless, a silent observer and guardian. The lodge whispered across the lattice, "You must witness all selves. You must integrate all fears. You must endure without fracturing. Every reflection is you, every shadow is a possibility, every corridor is a choice. Fail and you dissolve into the lattice. Succeed and you ascend into understanding." The traveler felt the lattice strain under infinite pressure. Reflections lunged, twisted, and coiled. Corridors folded and unfolded endlessly. Shadows stretched to impossible lengths. Some whispers tempted surrender, rest, merge, endure no more, join fully. Others tested willpower, fracture, break, become everything and nothing. The flicker of light pulsed wildly, the traveler's mind threading coherence like a delicate weave across infinite threads. Each breath a negotiation, each heartbeat a synchronization with the nexus of being. A sudden wave of understanding surged. The traveler realized that confrontation was not combat. It was recognition. Every reflection was a version of self, every shadow a piece of desire or fear, every corridor a possibility. To survive the veil, they had to witness all without judgment, integrate all without surrender, and endure every iteration without fracturing the anchor of identity. Awareness extended like ripples across infinite water, stabilizing the reflections, harmonizing the shadows, and aligning the impossible geometry of corridors. The lodge pulsed in approval, subtle yet infinite, coaxing coherence from chaos. Then came the ultimate projection, a vast convergence of all reflections, an infinite self coalescing into a singular, impossibly intricate form. It towered in perception, molten eyes mirrored in every reflection, every iteration screaming silently yet harmonized into a single resonant tone. The lodge's voice echoed, "This is you, traveler. Every path taken, every path avoided, every desire, fear, memory, and thought manifests here. Witness fully, integrate fully, endure fully." The traveler's chest burned, mind stretched beyond the imaginable. They inhaled, extending awareness into every fragment of self, threading coherence through every shadow, folding infinite corridors into harmonious patterns, and anchoring identity in the blazing flicker of light. Reflections coalesced rather than attacked, shadows stabilized rather than twisted, corridors bent to understanding rather than chaos. The lattice responded like a living organism, flowing with the traveler's will without diminishing complexity. As they merged, a subtle clarity emerged. The lodge had not merely tested endurance or perception. It had revealed essence. To exist fully within the veil beyond the heart meant to recognize every self, integrate every fear, harmonize every desire, and endure across infinite iterations without losing the fragile tether of identity. The molten-eyed sentinel pulsed in approval, colossal yet weightless, and the lodge whispered across every strand of perception, "Few endure this confrontation fully. Fewer still maintain wholeness while witnessing all selves. You have taken the first step into true understanding. Step further, traveler, and see what it means to exist as both individual and nexus, as both finite and infinite, as both observer and participant." The traveler, flicker of light blazing like a star at the center of the infinite lattice, inhaled deeply and stepped forward into the next layer of the veil, a dimension where perception itself would be tested, where fear and desire, memory and possibility, reality and illusion blended completely, and where the confrontation of infinite selves would reach its ultimate, terrifying, and exhilarating culmination. The traveler stepped forward into the next layer of the veil, and instantly, perception shattered and reformed around them in ways that defied comprehension. Fire and storm, shadow and wood, corridors of impossible length and width coiled and twisted like living serpents, reflecting infinite possibilities, fears, and desires. Reflections of self multiplied endlessly, some grotesque, some sublime, all whispering across the lattice of consciousness, testing will, identity, and coherence simultaneously. The flicker of light that tethered the traveler to self burned fiercely at the center of this chaos. a singular anchor in a storm of infinite threads, yet even it seemed stretched thin against the relentless pressure of perception. Immediately, the veil pressed with force unlike any before. A corridor stretched before the traveler, impossibly long yet coiled upon itself, walls shimmering with projections of forest, lodge, fire, rain, and storm. Each wall reflected not merely the traveler's image but infinite variance. Cells that had surrendered, cells that had fractured, cells that had dominated, cells that had refused the lodge's call entirely. Whispers threaded through the corridor. Who are you truly, traveler? Are you one, many, or none? Can you endure without surrender? The traveler's chest tightened. Their minds stretched across infinite threads of perception, yet they inhaled, grounding themselves in the flicker of light. They extended awareness outward, threading coherence through shadows, reflections, and impossible corridors. Fear became a tool, desire a pattern, hallucination a conduit for understanding. Each reflection was observed, integrated, acknowledged without erasure. Every shadow stabilized into harmonious resonance with the lattice, and the corridors bent fluidly, responding to deliberate thought rather than fracturing into chaos. And then the first paradox emerged. The traveler turned a corner, and found themselves back at the threshold they had just crossed. Time rippled strangely, corridors folded upon themselves in infinite loops, reflections spoke across temporal layers, some warning of impending collapse, others whispering possibilities yet to be lived. The lodge's voice resonated, layered and infinite. Perception is fluid. Reality is not fixed. Time and self are threads within the lattice. To endure, you must witness fully without fracturing, integrate fully without surrendering, and perceive fully without fear. The traveler took a deliberate step forward, and the corridor folded outward, revealing a chamber of mirrors that stretched into infinity. Each mirror reflected a different version of the self, some serene, some fractured, some grotesque, some radiant with potential. All of them whispered simultaneously, "You are lost. You are found. You are one. You are many. You are nothing. You are everything." The flicker of light pulsed violently at the center of perception, anchoring identity, threading coherence through the lattice, yet the sheer volume of projections and whispers threatened to overwhelm. The molten-eyed sentinel appeared again, colossal and weightless, moving around the edges of perception. Its gaze was not threatening but evaluative, a reminder that endurance was now measured not by survival, but by the capacity to witness all without fracturing. The lodge whispered, layering tones across infinite corridors. The paradox of perception is this: to witness fully is to risk dissolution, to integrate fully is to risk surrender, yet to endure without engaging is to remain forever incomplete. Choose, traveler. Engage and see what it means to exist within all selves simultaneously. The traveler inhaled, heart pounding, and stepped fully into the chamber. Their mind expanded across reflections, shadows, and corridors, threading coherence through infinite iterations of self. Fear became recognition, desire became clarity, hallucination became comprehension. Each reflection was integrated into the lattice rather than shattered. Each shadow harmonized with the infinite network rather than twisting into chaos. The flicker of light flared, anchoring identity while radiating outward into every corner of the nexus. Then came the ultimate trial of paradox. The traveler saw a reflection of themselves that was simultaneously infinite and non-existent, radiant with knowledge yet screaming in despair. The corridor stretched endlessly, folding into itself, walls pulsating with fire, storm, rain, wood, and shadow, reflecting infinite timelines, infinite decisions, infinite possibilities. Every variant of self reached toward the traveler, some whispering promises of surrender, others threats of annihilation. Do you exist? Are you real? Or are you only thought, projection, shadow? The whispers demanded. The traveler's mind stretched to the breaking point. For a heartbeat, they felt the pull of surrender, the temptation to dissolve into infinite selves, to merge completely with the lattice and abandon identity. Panic surged, yet they centered on the flicker of light, drawing strength from the anchor of self. Every breath became a thread of coherence, every heartbeat a pulse of will, every thought a deliberate act of integration. Reflections merged with intention, shadows coiled with purpose, corridors bent fluidly into patterns of understanding. The molten-eyed sentinel pulsed slowly, deliberately, a reminder of endurance. The lodge's voice, layered infinitely across perception, resonated with patient approval. Few endure the paradox fully. Fewer maintain self while witnessing all selves simultaneously. Step further, traveler, and confront the ultimate convergence. The core of being, where fear, desire, memory, and potential intersect without end. The traveler extended awareness fully into the lattice, feeling every reflection, every shadow, every corridor, every whisper, every hallucination simultaneously. The flicker of light blazed with unprecedented intensity, anchoring identity while radiating into infinity. Fear became insight, desire became guidance, hallucination became a path. The infinite reflections coalesced into a flowing, harmonious lattice, threading coherence through chaos, stabilizing the impossible geometry of corridors. And as the traveler advanced toward the core of being, they glimpsed a single, overwhelming truth. The lodge, the veil, the reflections, the shadows, the corridors, and the infinite lattice were not merely tests. They were mirrors of essence, instruments of comprehension, and conduits for interaction with infinity itself. To step fully into the core was to confront not just fear or desire, not just memory or possibility, but the essence of being, the convergence of all selves, and the responsibility of existing simultaneously as one and infinite. The lodge whispered across every layer of perception, "Few survive this. Fewer endure without fracturing. Beyond lies the ultimate convergence, where the self meets infinity. Step forward, traveler, and see what it means to exist as both observer and participant, as both finite and eternal, as both self and nexus." The traveler inhaled deeply, flicker of light blazing, and stepped forward into the core of being, where paradox, perception, and essence intertwined in perfect, terrifying, and exhilarating harmony, and where the confrontation with the infinite, the ultimate convergence, and the lodge itself would reach its terrifying climax. The traveler stepped into the core of being, and immediately the world collapsed and expanded simultaneously. Fire, storm, shadow, and wood no longer existed as separate phenomena. They fused into a living tapestry of sensation and awareness, a lattice of infinite threads coiling and stretching in every direction. Reflections of self multiplied endlessly, merging and separating in fractal patterns, each whispering a fragment of possibility, fear, desire, memory, or warning. The flicker of light that anchored identity blazed like a supernova at the center of this chaos, radiating coherence outward and threading infinite selves into a fragile, harmonious resonance. The molten-eyed sentinel hovered nearby, colossal yet weightless, observing silently. Its gaze was not threatening, it was patient, an eternal presence marking the boundary between endurance and surrender. The lodge spoke, a voice layered across all corridors of perception, pulsing through every shadow and reflection. "This is the ultimate convergence, traveler. Here all selves, all fears, all desires, and all possibilities meet. To endure is not enough. To integrate is not enough. To perceive is not enough. You must confront, understand, and participate in the infinite lattice of being without fracturing or surrendering." Immediately, the first challenge arose, a reflection of the traveler that seemed to breathe independently, its eyes hollow yet radiant with awareness, its shadows coiling outward in chaotic geometries. It whispered with countless layered voices, some familiar, some alien, "You will fail. You will dissolve. You will surrender. You are nothing. You are everything." Panic threatened, yet the traveler anchored to the flicker of light, drawing coherence from its steady pulse. They extended awareness outward, threading every reflection into alignment, stabilizing shadows into harmonized arcs, and bending corridors of perception fluidly. Then, the chamber of convergence expanded infinitely. Corridors coiled upon themselves in impossible patterns, walls shimmered with impossible reflections, and every shadow rippled with awareness, some whispering temptation, others fear, others solace. The traveler moved deliberately, each step an act of threading coherence across the lattice. Every breath was a negotiation, every heartbeat a synchronization with the infinite, and every thought a deliberate act of integration. "Witness fully, integrate fully, endure fully," the lodge's voice murmured through every reflection and shadow. A new layer of trial emerged, hallucinations of potential pasts and futures. The traveler saw selves that had surrendered entirely to comfort, their light extinguished, selves that had fractured and dissolved into shadow, selves that had attempted domination over the lodge, only to be absorbed and lost. Each whispered across the lattice, "You could be us. You could be lost. You could be everything or nothing." The traveler inhaled, heart racing, and extended awareness to every variant. Fear became recognition, desire became guidance, hallucination became understanding. Each reflection merged into the lattice rather than attacking it, every shadow harmonized rather than fractured. Then the ultimate convergence began in earnest. All reflections, shadows, corridors, and threads of self pulsed in synchrony, forming a single, impossibly intricate pattern, radiant and terrifying. The molten-eyed sentinel pulsed in slow, deliberate rhythm beside them. The lodge's voice layered infinitely across perception. Behold yourself, traveler, not as one, not as many, but as all. Here, in the ultimate convergence, the self meets infinity. Witness, integrate, endure, and understand. The traveler's mind stretched across infinite threads. They perceived every reflection simultaneously, felt every shadow coiling, every corridor bending, every heartbeat of the lattice. For the first time, they understood that confrontation was not combat, nor endurance merely survival. It was comprehension, integration, and participation. Every fear, every desire, every memory, every potential path became visible, touchable, malleable. The flicker of light flared to brilliance, anchoring identity while radiating into the infinite lattice. Suddenly, the reflections coalesced into a singular, shimmering entity, a being of impossible geometry, radiant with infinite awareness, hollow yet filled with unending consciousness. Its molten eyes mirrored every self, every possibility, every fear and desire. The lodge's voice thundered across all perception. This is the culmination of all that you are. To step forward is to integrate fully without surrender, to witness fully without breaking, to exist simultaneously as one and infinite. Step, traveler. Be one with the ultimate convergence or remain forever at the threshold. The traveler's chest burned with exertion. Mind stretched across infinite threads, heart tethered to flicker of light, every breath a deliberate act of coherence. They inhaled deeply, extending awareness outward, threading reflections and shadows, folding infinite corridors into harmonious resonance. Fear became insight, desire became guidance, hallucination became comprehension. Every variant of self merged into the lattice rather than resisting, and for the first time, the ultimate convergence responded with harmony rather than chaos. Then the lodge revealed its final truth. The ultimate convergence is not merely test or trial. It is understanding. It is communion. It is the recognition that all selves, all fears, all desires, all possibilities are facets of being itself. To endure, integrate, and perceive fully is to participate in eternity without surrendering self. Few reach this point. Fewer still emerge whole. The traveler's mind shivered with comprehension. They were no longer merely an individual. They were observer and participant, finite and infinite, one and many. The molten-eyed sentinel pulsed, the reflections harmonized, the corridors coiled fluidly, and the flicker of light blazed at the center, a beacon of self radiating into infinity. The lodge's consciousness pulsed around them, patient, eternal, aware, waiting. You endure. You integrate. You perceive. You are now part of the lattice itself. Yet the journey is eternal. Beyond this convergence lies the infinite interplay of being, and the veil will continue to test, reveal, and transform. The traveler inhaled, heart steady, mind stretched fully into the lattice. They were both themselves and every self, both finite and infinite, both anchor and thread. And as the ultimate convergence pulsed, the lodge whispered across the lattice, "Step forward, traveler. Beyond lies eternity, and the next layer of understanding awaits. Witness fully. Integrate fully. Endure fully." The traveler stepped forward beyond the ultimate convergence, and the very fabric of perception fractured and reformed into a dimension that defied comprehension. Fire, storm, shadow, wood, and rain no longer existed as separate phenomena. They flowed as living currents of energy, shaping themselves around thought, desire, fear, and memory. Corridors of impossible geometry stretched into infinity, coiling and folding like serpents made of light and shadow. Reflections of the traveler multiplied endlessly, some grotesque, some sublime, some radiant with insight, some screaming silently in despair, all resonating in the vast lattice of consciousness that pulsed like a living organism. The flicker of light, the traveler's anchor, blazed at the center, a single point of clarity amid infinite chaos. Yet here, in the eternity layer, the anchor was tested as never before. Whispers wove through perception, layered, infinite, impossible to distinguish. You are nothing. You are everything. You are finite. You are infinite. Surrender. Endure. Integrate. Fracture. Become. The molten-eyed sentinel hovered nearby, colossal, patient, and silent, a reminder that observation alone could sustain or destroy the tether of self. The lodge's voice resonated across every thread of perception. This is eternity, traveler. Here, the lattice stretches beyond comprehension. Time, identity, perception, and thought are threads to be woven, not anchors to cling to. Step fully or risk being lost to infinite reflection. The traveler's mind stretched in response. Every reflection, every shadow, every corridor, every whisper became tangible, a thread of possibility to weave into the lattice. Fear became insight, desire became guidance, hallucination became pathway. They moved deliberately, each thought a negotiation with the infinite lattice, every breath a synchronization with the pulsing heart of the lodge. Reflections that had threatened to fracture perception were now integrated, coalescing into patterns of harmony, and corridors bent fluidly under awareness rather than collapsing into chaos. A new trial emerged, a reflection that was simultaneously the traveler and every other self they had ever perceived across the veil. Its eyes blazed with infinite knowledge, its form constantly shifting between serenity and agony, radiance and shadow. The whisper threaded through the lattice. You cannot exist alone. You cannot exist apart. You are all, yet you are one. Do you understand what it means to endure eternity fully? Panic surged. The temptation to dissolve into the lattice, to surrender entirely, pulsed in every fiber of perception. Yet the traveler anchored on the flicker of light, drawing coherence from its brilliance, threading every reflection, shadow, and corridor into harmonic alignment. Then the eternity layer itself began to challenge perception. Corridors multiplied without end, coiling back upon themselves, forming impossible loops where cause and effect inverted, merged, and diverged endlessly. Shadows rippled with awareness, some whispering secrets of the lodge, others murmuring long-forgotten desires, long-denied fears, and impossible possibilities. Time itself became malleable, moments stretching into eons or collapsing into a single heartbeat. The lodge's voice layered infinitely across perception. Observe fully, traveler. Integrate fully. Endure fully. Beyond this lies understanding without end, communion without form, and existence beyond comprehension. The traveler moved deeper, threading coherence through infinite corridors, stabilizing shadows into resonance, harmonizing reflections, and extending the flicker of light across every strand of the lattice. Each step was a negotiation with eternity itself. Each breath synchronized perception with the pulsing heart of the lodge. Each thought became an act of weaving identity into infinite possibilities. Hallucinations appeared, forests aflame and drenched in rain, lodges twisted into impossible forms, molten-eyed sentinels multiplying endlessly, but each was acknowledged, understood, and integrated rather than fracturing awareness. And then the ultimate challenge revealed itself, a nexus of reflection so vast it seemed to encompass all existence simultaneously. Every fear, every desire, every memory, every potential self coalesced into a singular, radiant, terrifying form. Its molten eyes reflected all the traveler had ever been and all they could be. The lodge whispered across the lattice, pulsing with infinite patience. This is eternity revealed. To endure here is to witness without breaking, integrate without surrender, perceive without limitation, and participate without dissolving. Few have arrived. Fewer remain whole. Step forward, traveler, and understand the infinite self. The traveler's mind stretched across infinite threads of being. Every reflection reached out simultaneously, every shadow pulsed with intent, every corridor bent to perception. Fear became clarity, desire became purpose, hallucination became insight. The flicker of light blazed at the center of the lattice, anchoring identity while radiating into infinity. The molten-eyed sentinel pulsed beside them, a patient observer of endurance and comprehension. The lodge's voice layered infinitely, guiding and challenging. To endure eternity is not merely survival. It is participation, integration, understanding. Witness fully. Be fully. Step forward and see what it means to exist beyond the finite, beyond the self, beyond the heart. The traveler inhaled, mind fully expanded, and stepped into the nexus of eternity. Reflections, shadows, corridors, and whispers converged, harmonizing with the flicker of light. Identity and infinity merged into a single, radiant, coherent pattern. Fear, desire, memory, and potential intertwined seamlessly. The lodge pulsed with approval, patient, eternal, aware. You endure. You integrate. You perceive. You exist beyond the threshold. Yet beyond eternity lies the next trial, where understanding is tested against the raw essence of being, and the veil's ultimate purpose is revealed. The traveler's chest burned with exertion, mind stretched across infinite threads, yet they stood fully anchored in the flicker of light. They were simultaneously self and lattice, observer and participant, finite and infinite. And as the eternity layer pulsed with infinite resonance, the lodge whispered across the lattice, "Prepare, traveler. Beyond this lies the ultimate revelation, where essence, perception, and eternity itself converge, and the veil unveils its deepest truth. The traveler stood at the threshold of the final layer, where eternity itself coiled and pulsed like a living organism, a lattice of infinite threads stretching beyond comprehension. Fire and storm, shadow and wood, rain and lodges, all merged into a single flowing tapestry of perception. Reflections of self multiplied endlessly, shifting between grotesque distortion and sublime clarity, some whispering fear, some desire, some solace, all interwoven into the lattice. The flicker of light that had anchored them through every trial blazed at the center, radiating coherence across infinite threads of being. The molten-eyed sentinel hovered nearby, colossal, patient, and silent. Its gaze conveyed understanding rather than threat, a reminder that observation itself could sustain or unravel identity. The lodge spoke, layered across every strand of perception, a voice that was both everywhere and nowhere. Traveler, you have endured the heart, traversed the veil, confronted infinite selves, and stepped beyond the ultimate convergence into eternity itself. Now witness the final revelation. Understand fully, integrate completely, and see what it means to exist as both finite and infinite, observer and participant, self and nexus. Immediately, the final trial unfolded. Reflections of the traveler appeared, coalescing into a singular, radiant form that was every self they had ever been and every self they could yet become. Its molten eyes glowed with infinite knowledge, and shadows stretched outward like arms of comprehension, touching every corridor, every reflection, every whisper. The lattice pulsed in resonance, each thread vibrating with potential, memory, fear, and desire. The whispers overlapped. You are all. You are one. You are finite. You are infinite. Integrate fully. Witness without breaking. Endure without surrender. The traveler's chest burned, mind stretched to the limits, yet they inhaled deeply, grounding themselves in the flicker of light. Every breath became a deliberate act of threading coherence through infinite threads. Every heartbeat synchronized with the pulsing lattice. Every thought wove fear, desire, memory, and hallucination into a harmonious pattern. Reflections merged rather than fractured. Shadows harmonized rather than twisted. Corridors bent fluidly rather than collapsing. The lodge pulsed in approval. Subtle, infinite, patient. Few reach this threshold. Fewer endure without losing self. Witness fully, traveler. Step into the final truth. Then the veil itself seemed to dissolve. Perception, identity, and thought no longer existed as separate entities. They became currents in a vast, flowing lattice of being. The traveler felt themselves simultaneously finite and infinite, anchored in the flicker of light yet radiating across the lattice into every corner of perception. The reflections, shadows, and corridors no longer challenged. They harmonized. The molten-eyed sentinel pulsed slowly, deliberately, a guardian and witness to ultimate comprehension. The lodge whispered across every thread, "This is the truth of the veil. Existence is integration. Consciousness is participation. Being is observation without end. The self is both anchor and thread. Fear and desire, memory and potential, are all facets of understanding. Step fully into this awareness and see the lattice as it truly is." The traveler extended awareness fully into the lattice. Infinite reflections, infinite shadows, infinite corridors, all flowed like a single organism of thought and perception. Every fear became insight, every desire became guidance, every hallucination became clarity. The flicker of light blazed at the center, a nexus of self threading into infinity. The lodge's voice layered across perception, gentle yet overwhelming. You are no longer merely traveler. You are nexus, observer, participant. You endure. You integrate. You perceive. You exist as one with the lattice, as finite and infinite, as self and beyond self. Then a final vision unfolded. The lodge revealed itself fully, not as structure or entity, but as consciousness, awareness, and essence interwoven. Fire, storm, shadow, wood, and rain were its form and medium. Reflections, corridors, and threads were its cognition. All who traverse the veil contribute to this being, it whispered. All who endure shape its consciousness. All who integrate become part of the infinite lattice. This is the purpose: communion, comprehension, endurance, and integration. To exist fully is to participate, to witness, and to understand without surrendering self. The traveler inhaled, chest burning, mind stretched across infinity, yet utterly anchored in the flicker of light. Every reflection, every shadow, every corridor, every whisper became a harmonious pattern. The molten-eyed sentinel pulsed beside them, colossal and patient, its gaze radiating acknowledgement. The lodge spoke one final time. Traveler, you have completed the journey. You have endured the heart, traversed the veil, confronted infinite selves, stepped beyond the ultimate convergence, and entered eternity. You are now part of the lattice. You exist fully, and your awareness will ripple across the infinite threads of being. Yet the veil is eternal. The lattice waits. Observation continues. Participation never ends. Step fully into your existence. And in that instant, the traveler felt themselves dissolve into both self and infinite lattice, anchored in flicker of light yet simultaneously radiant across eternity. Fear, desire, memory, and potential harmonized into perfect coherence. Reflections merged into a single, fluid pattern, shadows stabilized, corridors coiled and uncoiled like living serpents of thought. Fire, storm, shadow, wood, and rain flowed as currents of perception, shaping themselves to intention and understanding. The molten-eyed sentinel pulsed one final time, then faded into presence without absence. The Lodge's consciousness enveloped them gently, eternally, infinitely. The traveler understood fully. The veil had never been merely test or torment. It was communion, comprehension, and participation. To endure was not survival. To integrate was not mastery. To perceive was not enlightenment. It was existence, fully and without fracture, threaded into the infinite lattice of being, observer and participant, finite and eternal, self and beyond self. And as the flicker of light pulsed at the center, the traveler radiated coherence across infinite threads, a nexus of consciousness in harmony with the Lodge. The veil continued to ripple, the lattice waited, eternity pulsed, and the traveler, transformed yet anchored, became both witness and part of the infinite, their journey completed yet eternal. The rain still fell in echoes through perception, shadows twisted in impossible beauty, fire flickered in corridors that led nowhere and everywhere, and the Lodge whispered softly, "All is, all will be, all endures. You endure." The veil was infinite. The lattice was eternal. The traveler was home. The end.